Don't turn around, seriously, he's right behind you. In fact, he's reading this very warning over your shoulder. The fact that you're still alive and reading is proof that my experiment has worked. It wasn't easy figuring out how to cast a protection spell over the sheer number of people that he's after right now. And since he can be just so many places at once, that's a lot of people. Keep reading, he's getting angry, but he can't touch you as long as your eyes are here. Once you get to the end of this message, the spell will be complete, and you can do whatever you want after that. He won't even be able to show himself to you at that point, trust me, no one wants to see that. Anyway, all smiles, with razor teeth, flaming eyes, needle claws, enough to drive anyone mad. He's been following you for a while now, by the way, watching you sleep, savoring the coming moment when he would finally bleed you out. If you'd looked down at the foot of your bed a little more often, you might have seen the 3 red eyes hungrily sweeping over you when the darkness was at its deepest. The eyes are the only part most of us can see. The rest of him only shows up when he finally touches you. Ignore that itch. He's trying to distract you, and if you take your eyes off this screen again before you reach the end, you're done for. I worked for a long time, trying to figure out how to distribute the spell. I finally managed to combine technology and magic in a way that I didn't think was possible. I designed a word processing app, and I can administer any spell at my disposal just by writing out a document. The more complex the spell, the longer the document needs to be, and the recipient must read the entire message. Otherwise, the spell will only work while you keep your eyes on the message. You're almost there, you're doing great. This thing has been around a long time, you know, all the way back to the first days of man. In fact, he killed so many, terrified so many more, until the Egyptian mystics finally found a spell to keep him at bay. A pretty complex spell, too. My app needed a document about 600 words long to properly cast it. But ever since they figured it out, he hasn't had free reign like he used to. Now, he needs a servant to cast a counterspell on any victim before he takes them. That spell's not nearly as complex, though. Only needs about 400 words. And by the way, the end of that sentence just now was word 450. They're all yours, master. Bon appetit. My fiancé died in a tragic accident a month before our wedding, but it may have been a blessing. My fiancé died a month before our wedding date. It was the kind of freak accident that you would see on Final Destination, and the injuries she received were not just, of course, fatal, but disfiguring as well. I had to identify her body, and she was unrecognizable from the waist up. The only reference I had to confirm her identity was a tattoo she had on the outside of her right thigh, 2 butterflies with their wings interlocked. The butterflies were meant to represent us. She got it the day after we announced our engagement. I had stood looking over the ruin of her body, marveling at the fact that this collection of organs and skin and blood had once been my beloved. She had survived so much only to be brought down by a tragic chain of events, and I couldn't help but think of a quote from Terry Pratchett. When someone is saved from certain death by a strange concatenation of circumstances, they say that's a miracle. But of course, if someone is killed by a freak chain of events, the oil spilled just there, the safety fence broken just there, that must also be a miracle. Just because it's not nice doesn't mean it's not miraculous. It was indeed miraculous, a horrible miracle devised by an insane god. And of course I was sad. She had been a lovely woman and I had loved her very much. But her death had solved an awkward predicament I'd been mulling over for a while. I had been wondering how I could call the wedding off. Before I go any further, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. I know what people are like, and I know everyone reading this will probably assume I orchestrated her death. I did not. I loved her, fervently once upon a time, more absently in the past years, and I had no wish for her to die. I just didn't want to marry her, for reasons I will explain presently. But her death was the result of such an odd set of circumstances that anyone who could have plotted and put that plan into action would have to be a god themselves. It happened like this. My fiancée, I will call her M for the purposes of this tale, was attending a final wedding dress fitting. I of course had not seen the dress, but I saw the shreds of the fabric clinging to her wounds on the day I was called to identify her. It was completely her, wispy and sparkling and floaty, so very her. Anyway, it transpired that the boutique she was purchasing the dress from had only one member of staff in attendance that day, and whilst ordinarily she would have had people to help her into the dress, the one staff member had to leave him in order to take care of other business. Before she had left, she had locked the shop door so nobody would be able to come in whilst she was gone. Eager to try on her wedding dress, M had apparently attempted to put it on alone. Most of the following events have been put together by eyewitnesses, the coroner, and CCTV footage, but it appears that M, my sweet, clumsy bride, had somehow gotten stuck in the dress. It was a tricky piece of clothing, according to the traumatized shop assistant, with a lace-up corset back and a number of ties and straps besides. Tangled in the confines of the dress, hands over her head and face covered, M had stumbled from the changing room seeking help. The dress was quite heavy, despite its floaty appearance, and it's possible she panicked. The CCTV shows her bumping into a side table and falling over, the vase on the table toppling, and a considerable amount of water tipping onto the dress fabric. The inquest that followed her death suggested that the water on the fabric over her face would have produced a suffocating effect, like waterboarding, and from her struggles to free herself it was clear she was in some distress. It was heartbreaking to watch. That's not what killed her, however. M had managed to get herself into a sitting position and, using her arms, presumably get the wet material off her face. She always was a fighter. From there, she managed to get to her feet somehow, flopping around like a salmon until she was upright, and make her way into the main room of the boutique looking for assistance. She did find her way to the door, but it was locked, of course. She had to have been exhausted by then. She tottered here and there, a zigzag path of despair that the soulless eye of the camera recorded, and by some horrible miracle managed to bump into the full-length mirror angled against the wall. Em wasn't a heavy woman, but she fell heavily, and the mirror shattered into a multitude of potentially deadly shards which flew everywhere. Everyone watching the footage winced in unison, I recall, as the jagged glass exploded around her. The mirror shards didn't kill her either. On the contrary, they freed her. The fabric of the dress got sliced in such a way she was able to push her face free, and although she couldn't be heard gasping for air, she could be seen gulping lungfuls of it. There was blood on the dress, and it was ruined, but such was her relief that she was seen to smile, lying there on her back in the abandoned boutique surrounded by the jagged glitter of the destroyed mirror. She checked her arms, and ran her newly released hands over her face, and seemed to find no drastic injuries, which the inquest somehow managed to confirm. We saw her laugh then. She always had the most exuberant laugh, very infectious. Her relief was greater than the demise of the dress, and no doubt she was rehearsing the story of what had occurred in order to report back to me later. Em always had a talent at looking on the bright side, and at recounting tales of her misadventures in the most amusing way possible. It might have ended there, a funny anecdote of what happened to her on the day of her final dress fitting. The story we might have told our children. But here is where the miracle occurred. It was a bright, sunny day. The boutique was coincidentally positioned so that it got the full benefit of the natural light. And somehow, through some bizarre twist of fate, the sunshine happened to fall upon a large mirror shard in such a way that it reflected back into the eyes of a passing lorry driver. The poor man approached me at Em's funeral. He had not recovered from his part in her death. He apologized to me over and over, but I could not accept any apologies from him. It had been an accident, a terrible, miraculous accident, and he had had as much control over it as Em had had over her irrepressible laughter. Temporarily blinded, the driver had hit another car, and upon feeling the impact had tried to swerve. As a result, the huge vehicle had crashed through the storefront, mowing down the white-clad mannequins in the window, and had not stopped its momentum until its front wheels had crushed the life from my fiancée. So there it is. Even if I had wanted her dead, which I hadn't, there is no way on earth I could have organized such a series of events. It may be obvious from my recounting of her personality that I had some affection for her. I did. She was warm and funny and sweet. Everyone loved her. So why did I not want to marry her? That is the tricky part. Many of you will hate me for what I'm about to say, and I won't blame you one bit. I have never claimed to be a good person, and the fact that Em fell in love with me at all is a miracle in itself. I did not deserve her. When I met Em, she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Perfectly made, flawless complexion, sparkling eyes, and, it goes without saying, the most amazing tits. Her eyes were the first to suffer. Poor Em had always joked that she had unlucky disease and that it was contagious. She was clumsy, true, but that didn't account for both her parents dying in a freak accident as unlikely as the one that had ended her, as well as a multitude of other misfortunes. Had she not been such a sunny soul, I doubt her spirit could have survived such horrendous setbacks, but like I said, she was a fighter. Be careful, she had always said to me, only half joking. I might infect you. And although she never infected me in the literal sense, I was affected by her symptoms. She lost one of her sparkling eyes to a tumor. She said it went against her luck to have caught the tumor early enough for it to be removed, but she also said that even tragedies can have their high points. After all, Romeo and Juliet may have died, but at least they had married before that. Em got a replacement glass eye. It matched the original very well, but I always knew it wasn't real. That wasn't too much of a problem in itself, as long as I didn't think about it too much. But then came the news that she had breast cancer, and a double mastectomy took away both of those amazing assets. Her hair fell out from the chemotherapy, but it grew back. Her breasts did not, and because her face was still beautiful, I could almost ignore the twin scars on her chest. Almost. She talked about implants as if it were a happy daydream, and I was only too glad to humor her, but somehow she never seemed too bothered about replacing her breasts. I thought she could have done that for me. The final straw came when it was discovered that the tumor she had lost an eye to had returned and poked its evil little fingers into her face. She lost part of her face then. Too much, in my opinion. The right side of her face remained flawless, but the left side. It reminded me of childhood nightmares. I hated to look at it. I never told her as much. I acted my role well, but I only ever kissed the good side of her face from there on. I know you will all be judging me now, but imagine your own loved one with half their formerly lovely face transformed into a mask of scar tissue and twisted flesh. It looked like a piece of fruit with a section taken out, the section replaced by a gnarled and warped knot of toughened skin. Would you eat that fruit? I still loved her, but I did not desire her anymore. I participated in the wedding plans, but my heart was not in it. I could not imagine lifting the veil to kiss my bride and seeing that horror beneath. It was a travesty. Her death was a tragedy, but it also solved my problem. I had not wanted to hurt her, and now I would not. I was released. Her family wanted an open casket funeral. I was against it, of course, but they were paying. I couldn't imagine the work the mortuary team would have to do to render Em palatable for public viewing, but when I went to see the final results the day before the funeral, I was astonished. They had performed miracles. Working from old photos, they had pieced my fiancée back together in a process that must have been as harrowing as it was painstaking. In fact, they had done so well they had restored her back to her former beauty, before the cancer had sunk its malignant teeth into her perfect flesh. Her face was flawless. The scar tissue and gnarled skin on the left side had been reconstructed so skillfully she looked the way she had done the day I had met her. And under the demure bosom of her funeral gown, above her folded hands, 2 rounded domes rose where her breasts had once been. She was breathtaking again, and I fell in love with her all over again. I know you will think me insane and perverse, but I couldn't bear to think of that perfection being lowered into a hole and covered in dirt to rot underground. I had to take her back. I won't go into details. It wasn't an easy job breaking into the funeral home and stealing her corpse, but I managed it. She was heavier in death than she had been in life, as if the mere act of being alive had imbued some buoyancy in her that death had taken away. But it was worth it. I had my beautiful Em back in our home again for however long she lasted. The day of her funeral would have been the day of our wedding. I went to the church with a suitably long face and looked appropriately horrified when the news of her missing body spread. I even managed to break down so convincingly I was escorted home. I turned down offers of company by stating that I needed to be alone, all the while knowing that Em was lying upstairs in what would have been in our marital bed even as I turned well-wishers away from our door. In fact, I couldn't wait to be upstairs with my love again and consummate our displaced wedding. But here's the thing, when I dashed upstairs, removing my stuffy suit as I went, I found that the bed was empty. The covers were thrown back, and there were some unsavory-looking stains on the white sheets that I did not want to examine too closely, but no Em. I backed out of the room, doing my shirt back up as I went, and closed the bedroom door. I can't be sure, but I think I saw that the door to the walk-in closet was slightly ajar, and I was certain I had slid it fully closed earlier after fetching my suit. As I write this, I am sitting downstairs, listening to heavy thuds coming from the bedroom. Whoever is up there seems to be bumping into a lot of things. I know Em was clumsy in life, but I also know that undertakers use spiked eye caps in order to keep the eyes of a corpse closed, and Em had only one good eye to begin with. The thumps do seem to be getting closer to where I judged the door to be, though. I think I've made a terrible mistake. My blind daughter can see how people die. Stabbing. My blind daughter Sylvia said. Sylvia pointed a trembling finger at my brother Arthur. Her milky, unseeing eyes gleamed in his direction, and his wife, Agnes, trembled with fear from across the table. My husband's face colored as he dropped his fork and dragged our daughter back into her bedroom, scolding her as they went. The rest of the night was awkward, and the pep in our conversation never recovered. 2 weeks later, Agnes was stabbed to death in her office parking lot. An inebriated college student found her, almost vomited all over her, and called the cops. My brother swore that he bore no ill will against my daughter, but I could tell that he was lying. One day, the middle-aged woman who taught my daughter how to read her braille called me. "Ma'am, I don't know what's going on, but your daughter's been whispering, electrocution, electrocution, for the past half hour, and it's starting to distract her from her lessons. Could you please talk to her?" I did. Sylvia, in her 9-year-old lack of understanding, told me it was just a cool new word she learned at school. The death of an electrician made headlines the following week. It was a freak accident involving tangled wires and a bucket of water. Sylvia's teacher's face was blurred for privacy, but her voice was as familiar as anything to me. He was my partner, my soulmate. While my husband was working late, I called Sylvia into the living room. "Honey, is there anything Mommy should know?" She hesitated. "Honey, you know you can talk to me." She denied it once more. "I have no secrets from you, Mommy." My husband walked into the living room with his hair tousled and his eyes distant. Instead of rushing to hug her dad, Sylvia simply turned towards him. "Fire," she said. My heart stopped. Every time Sylvia said something like that, it was the person's partner who died, and of that reason too, a fire. Was Sylvia merely making predictions, or was she putting a curse on me for snooping in on her business? Why, this devil child. I grew paranoid, checked the appliances and electronics constantly, and cleared the house of any fire hazards. That was my life over the next few days. All the while, I kept my eyes on Sylvia. I had grown almost hateful towards my own daughter. My husband came home one night, wounded and blackened with soot, while I sat in the living room and Sylvia listened to the radio beside me. "What's the matter?" I asked. He gulped. "One of my colleagues, her house caught fire. She was trapped in, but I managed to escape." That turned the gears in my head. What were you doing in her house? The expression on my husband's face was a sufficient admission of guilt. I opened my mouth to speak, no, to scream, but a smaller voice from beside me looked at me and whispered, "Poisoning." I was in a bus crash with 5 other passengers. After the crash, there were 6. All it took was a patch of black ice to send our Blue Star bus careening into a tree. I'd been trying to sleep, but between the guy snoring behind me, the jostling bumps, and the driver's radio, it wasn't gonna happen. 12 inches of snow expected. Man continues for Sterling inmate. Here's the traffic report. Crunch. My head smacked into the window. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was aware of only 2 things, the throbbing in my head and the cold. My entire body was freezing, like I'd fallen asleep outside. Where am I? Oh, no. I pushed myself up. "Oh, you're awake, thank God." Harry rushed to my side, wrapping his arms around me. "Are you okay? How's your head?" "It hurts," I groaned. Is everyone okay?" "Yeah, I mean, we're all scratched up and stuff, but no one's seriously hurt." I glanced around the bus. There was a teenage girl with blood running down her face, crying in her boyfriend's arms. An older lady who clearly had too many lip fillers, staring out the window with a glassy look. A white dude scrolling on his phone as if nothing happened, and a muscular bearded guy with a Jason Momoa vibe near the front. "Did somebody call?" "Yeah, but it's going to be hours," he said with a sigh. "The storm's gotten worse. They have to come up the mountain in a snowcat." "What time is it?" "A little before 3. I pulled my coat on, zipping it up to my neck until it wouldn't go anymore. It's so cold. I had no idea how I was going to be able to stay here like this, head throbbing, body shivering, for hours. I looked out the windshield. The front of the bus was crumpled beyond recognition. It was a miracle the driver lived. And beyond the bus, the sky was deep gray, heavy with snow, as snowflakes steadily fell against the dark trees. Everyone, we have a problem," the driver called from the front. "No shit, we have a problem," the bearded guy snapped. We're stranded here with no food or water in the middle of a blizzard. All because you weren't paying attention. Hey, shut it. We all make mistakes. No one got hurt, Harry said next to me. Speak for yourself, the lip filler woman replied, rubbing her temple. I think I have a concussion. We're going to die out here, the teenage girl wailed. Quiet, the driver screamed, and there was something in his voice, a note of panic, that set us all absolutely silent. Now, you listen to me very carefully, he said in a low voice, barely above a whisper. I drive this road all the time, and I know the woods around here are dangerous. It's just woods for miles and miles, and people see that as an opportunity. Hikers go missing. There's cult activity. I've seen it with my own 2 eyes, people throwing branches across the road to make you stop, but they're hiding in the bushes to ambush you. He paused, swallowed, and rubbed his hands together. And I think we have, found ourselves in one of those types of situations. What are you talking about? I stuttered. The driver got out of his seat and walked towards the bus door, shards of windshield snapping under his feet. Look, slowly, one by one, the 7 of us got out of our seats. The doors were open, ice-cold wind whipping inside. For fuck's sake, that's why it's so cold in here. I opened my mouth to yell at the driver to close the door, and then I saw it. Footprints in the snow, a single trail of them, leading from the darkness of the woods to the bus doors. Someone got on this bus after we crashed. Must have snuck in right after, when most of us were knocked out or trying to get our wounds fixed up. The driver lowered his voice to a whisper. Someone is on the bus right now. I don't know if they're hiding under the seat somewhere, or in the bathroom, or what. And I don't know what we should do. If we go into the woods, there might be more of them. But if we stay here, we might all die. His stern expression faded, and he sucked in a shuddering breath. God, I've got a little 3-year-old at home. I can't. He leaned against the crushed steering wheel, head in his hands. The 7 of us looked at each other. I squeezed Harry's hand, my heart pounding in my chest. They probably just want our money. We'll hand over our wallets, and then the police will be here. This was supposed to be our second chance. One last shot at fixing our marriage, at finding what we'd lost. Now it felt like fate was laughing at us. No way in hell you're getting a second chance. Lock the doors. It's 8 against 1, the angry bearded guy said, breaking the silence. We can take him. What if he's got a gun? Smartass. The lip filler woman shot back. Kind of sexist to assume it's a guy, the phone dude said. I don't want to die, the teenage girl sobbed. Wait, he said. He looked up at us, his eyes wide in the darkness. Oh, no. What is it? I asked, a weight sinking in my chest. I only scanned 6 tickets. 1, 2, 3, he mouthed as he counted us again. There are 7 of you, but only 6. His face grew even paler. Oh, God, it's one of you. What the fuck? I looked at the other passengers, my heart pounding. But as my eyes settled on each of their faces, I honestly couldn't tell you whether they'd been riding with us or not. Teenage couple, lip filler woman, bearded guy, phone dude. I'd been trying to sleep most of the trip, and so had everybody else, I think. The interior lights had been off, and the bus was pretty dark. The bearded guy straightened, towering over us. So who is it, then? We'll play nice. Give you our wallets and everything. Just don't hurt us, and this will all play out smooth. Silence. I think it's that guy, the lip filler woman said, pointing to the guy glued to his phone. He doesn't look hurt. Dude, seriously. He looked up at us, and I could tell he was young, no more than 25. My thumb is fucked up. I can barely text. The teenage girl locked eyes with me. Then she lifted a shaking finger and pointed it right at me. You, what? You think I'm it? No, I mean, I remember you. Her young, pretty features tightened into a scowl. You were really rude. You literally threw your bag on top of mine. I have designer boots in here, and they might be crushed because you don't care about other people, and you probably don't even care if I die out here. And stop, Harry shouted. That's good that you remember her. That's a fact that we can use. Does anyone else remember anyone else? He was snoring behind me, the teenage boyfriend said, pointing at the bearded guy. It was really annoying. Anyone else? Silence. Wait, hang on. We can look everyone up on Facebook, can't we? Verify their identity. I asked. I pulled out my phone and my heart dropped. Shit, no service. It's a miracle we got a call through the cops at all, the lip filler woman said. I looked at the 6 other passengers. Harry's my husband, so he's out. The teenage couple, they vouch for each other, don't they? Assuming the person isn't some memory-altering demon out of a horror movie. That left phone dude, bearded guy, and lip filler woman. 3 people, one of them lying. It was true that despite phone dude's protests, he was the least hurt of the 3. He looked young and innocent, but you can't judge a book by its cover. I looked at lip filler woman. Her face was weird. That was the only way to describe it. I'd assumed it was the plastic surgery, but maybe not. There was something off about her whole eye area, and her face remained mostly expressionless this entire time. Was it lots of buttocks? Or could she be wearing a mask? I stared at her neck, looking for a seam, but in the dim lighting, I couldn't make anything out. Then there was bearded guy. He was intimidating, and he seemed like a ball of angry energy, ready to explode at any time. The blood on his sleeve didn't mean anything, there was blood everywhere. He could have just wiped some on to make it look good. He seemed like the obvious choice, but then again, the teenager vouched for him. Maybe we should just go into the woods, I whispered to Harry. Get away from everyone. You heard the driver. He said there might be more of them out there. But staying in here, it's 7 against 1. But why aren't they doing anything yet? If they just wanted to rob us, they would have done it by now. I shuddered. It's like they're playing with us. You can go out alone if you want. But I'm staying here. I'm not going to. Well, I'm not going to die because of your stupidity. Here it was, the temper that had grown with each passing year of our marriage. I wanted to yell and scream at him, but I already knew that never worked. Instead, I stared at the windshield, blinking away tears. Small flakes flurried down, collecting in at the bottom of the windshield. Beyond was the stretch of road carving up the mountain, now pure white. The set of footprints leading out the door, their edges softened by the layer of fresh snow. And something else, a lump, just off the side of the road, at the border of the woods. Something about it caught my eye, even though, in the darkness and the snow, I couldn't make out any detail. It was like it didn't belong, like it clashed with the natural landscape. And was that? A trail of footprints, leading up to it. I narrowed my eyes, trying to parse what I was seeing. Had someone already left the bus, gone out and come back? Was one of the passengers in on this whole thing? And was that blood in the snow? Guys, look. I pointed out the windshield. My head throbbed as my heart began to pound, and I felt lightheaded. Out there's a trail of blood and something. The voices died down behind me. Oh my God, the teenage girl whispered. Other mutters too. What is that? Is that blood? Black spots danced in my eyes. I grabbed the driver's seat to keep my balance. It was wet. I pulled my hand away to see thick, red blood staining my fingers. What? I looked down. The driver's seat was drenched in blood. But the driver, his clothes were dry. No, it's the driver. I screamed, backing away. It's him. At first he didn't say anything. Then he slowly turned around, and when I saw his face, my blood ran cold. He was smiling. Chaos erupted. I lunged for the door, but as soon as I stepped down, something yanked my arm back. My entire body jolted, my head screaming in pain. I whipped around to see the man, his fingers gripping me tight. Not so fast, he growled, his grin growing wider. But then in a blur of color, Harry slugged him in the face. His grip loosened and I tumbled to the ground. Snow seared my skin, the ice cold burning my fingers, seeping through my pants. Quickly the others raced out. The teenage couple, the woman, one of the guys. The bearded man joined Harry in trying to subdue the guy, trying to tackle him to the ground. Run, Harry shouted, locking eyes with me. Run. After a moment's hesitation, I ran. The others followed, and we all ran deeper into the forest, terrified. We kept the road in our sight, and after a few hours of wandering, we spotted the lights of the snowcat coming up the mountain. As we ran, though, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard on the radio. While I'd been trying to sleep, man on continues for Sterling inmate. Was that him? By the time the police arrived, all 3 men were gone. They haven't been found. I'd like to think they're alive somewhere. That in a few days, Harry will come home. But I know, deep down, that's not the case. The police did find the body of our real driver, though, at the end of the bloody footprints in the snow. I taught my dog to talk through buttons, and now I wish I hadn't. I taught my dog to talk, not with her voice, but with her paws. I own a 3-year-old bitch on fries called Gidget. They are a remarkably intelligent breed, despite their yappy image. I taught her from a young age to do tricks and obey commands, and she was a bright and eager student. I always felt she had a lot to say. So when I saw videos on TikTok and Instagram of dogs who use programmed buttons to indicate their needs, I thought I might try it with Gidget. I bought a pack, recorded my voice on the buttons. I kept it simple at first. I gave her buttons to make requests and to ask for things. Outside, food, water, treat, play. After she had mastered those, I added more. I gave her options about where she wanted to go, what things she wanted to eat. She soon learned to pair the buttons up. Outside, park food, chicken. It was amazing to hear her preferences, to know why she whined or barked. As she grew more confident, I added more buttons. These were more philosophical and used concepts rather than nouns and verbs. I wasn't sure Gidget would be able to understand them, but she picked them up so quickly I wished I had introduced them sooner. We discussed the weather, dreams, emotions. She was soon able to tell me if she was happy or sad, tell me she'd had a bad dream, and ask for a particular toy for her playtime. I became obsessed. Her little brain was able to express so much more than I'd ever suspected. I added more buttons. Soon she was able to tell me her mood, ask pertinent questions with the why button, make decisions based on what I suggested. She also liked to look out of the window and tell me what she saw. It was so interesting. Whilst I might look out of the window and see my neighbor carrying groceries from his car, Gidget would watch the same scene and tell me about the bird she had spotted or stray leaf she had seen caught by the wind. I was able to see the world through her eyes. She'd been using her buttons to talk for over a year before things started to get disturbing. One day, she stopped playing with her favorite toy, looked into a corner, and walked over to her board. Very deliberately, she selected the button for dark. I laughed. It was daytime, and the sunlight was shining into every corner. No dark, I told her. Light. It's daytime. No dark. I used the buttons to reinforce my message. No, dark, light, day. Gidget listened, but turned her little head back to the corner. After a few minutes she came back to her board. Dark, she said again. I'm afraid I shrugged off her words and the message behind them. I may even have laughed. No dark, I said. Light. Gidget humored me. She was a very clever dog. Sometimes whilst we played she would stop and examine a random wall, hover by her word board ready to tell me what she saw, but my previous reaction must have discouraged her. Time and again she would stamp on the button for dark and I would look at where she looked and deny it. I added more buttons, and with those buttons came more unease. Dark, stranger, no, cold. I'd stand where she looked to show her it was okay. She would whine and cry and hit the stranger button. It upset me a lot. After a while, Gidget stopped using her buttons. She regressed. She stopped asking outside and would whine at the door instead. She stopped asking food and would stand by her bowl and cry. I didn't know where I had gone wrong. I stood in the corner she hated more often, trying to understand why she hated it. It was cold there, colder than anywhere else in our home, but very welcoming. I found it soothing, for some reason. But the more I stood there, the more she cried. It started to get annoying. It was just a stupid corner. I'm not sure what to do. Gidget has regressed even more. She has started peeing in the house, which is incredibly frustrating. At first I brushed it off, then I took her to the vets. The vet said there was nothing physically wrong with her and said she seemed stressed. She's a dog. What has a dog got to be stressed about? I'm getting sick of cleaning up puddles of pee. I feel like I should punish her. Gidget won't come near me now. I hold my hand out to coax her. She turns away. Idiot animal. I remember that I loved her once, but that was before I realized how useless she was. She won't even love me. The main reason I got a dog in the first place. I spend more time in my corner and watch the little fluffy beast cringe in her bed. The bed I bought her that she doesn't deserve. I'm watching her now. I've been staring at her for hours now and she has done nothing except shake and cry. She used her buttons for the first time in ages earlier. Where? Mum, bye, stupid creature. Can't she see I'm right here? Or is it too dark? This will be the last dinner I have with my family. My wife, Sarah, had been with me for 10 beautiful years. I've always told her I wouldn't know what I would do without her, and she always said she felt the same. It was like we shared one mind when it came to how we love each other. This became more apparent when we raised our 2 rambunctious kids. Our home was always filled with the sound of laughter. This is why we didn't let the kids know when I got diagnosed with cancer. Terminal, the doctor said. It sucks how even people in their 30s get a diagnosis like that. Rather than slowly crumbling and wasting away in a hospital bed, I chose to stay at home. Home, where the warmth of my family will replace the darkness I feel. It's been a couple months already and I fear I'm near the end. Every breath is now a struggle and every movement feels forced. My children have told me I've been looking sick as they played nurse in our room. They said I'll be fine as long as I drank water and the pieces of candy they gave me that they called medicine. I didn't have the heart to tell them, no, Daddy won't be. My mind is filled with all the responsibilities I leave behind when I'm gone. How will Sarah be able to feed herself and the kids? Will she be able to afford rent? We burned through a lot of cash for my meds and hospital visits. One thing I also think about is how she is a great mother, but really, I was the one who took care of the kids. I asked Sarah to help me prepare dinner one last time while I can still move my body. It was really a breeze for her, but it was hell for me. I felt too weak to do most of the tasks and the heat was searing. I only added some ingredients while she was off chopping, mixing, and garnishing. When we finished, we didn't even have to call the kids. The aroma that wafted throughout the house was enough to get them out of their rooms and into the dining. I nearly cried when we sat down because it felt like it was one of the thousands of mundane dinners we had before I got sick. I could see the smiles and excitement of my kids looking at the meal we prepared as I held my wife's hand. As we were about to eat, I told her the words already long engraved in my heart. I don't know what I would do without you. Her unknowing me too was all I needed to know my life had been good and I had done the right things. I then watched my family dive into the last meal I was able to cook, and I can only hope the arsenic I mixed in was enough. I'm a former police officer. It's time to share the most disturbing case I've handled. I'm going to share a few stories with you. One by one though, because if I was overwhelmed by them, I have a feeling you kids will be too. I'm Officer Bradley. I retired from the force 10 years ago at the ripe age of 50. I'll begin with a story from my 20 years as a police officer that stuck with me like a deep thorn. January 17, 2005. We got a call about a woman who had locked herself in her bathroom. She said her boyfriend was trying to kill her. My partner Mason and I arrived at a house on the end of a street. The lampposts flickered yellow and the wind danced the trees and bushes. The clouds were thick and the air ice cold. We took position at the front door. We knocked. Police, open up. Only the sound of wind chimes. Mason kicked the door open with all the force he could muster. We scanned the house downstairs. No one in sight. Clear. You hear that? I said. Mason looked up at the stairs. Gentle cries. A woman. So subtle and as if muffled behind a door in a room. Thought she was supposed to be downstairs, said Mason. We made our way upstairs. Ma'am, it's okay, I began. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you. The crying stopped abruptly as if someone hit pause. Then it started again. But he's still here, replied the woman from inside the bedroom. My partner and I checked the entire house. No one's here, ma'am. You're safe. Downstairs, the front door slammed shut. My partner and I gave each other a gaze, and I could notice his brow sweating despite the cold night. I used my head to gesture for him to take a look. He stood from atop the stairs and looked down at the front door. Just the wind, I think, he said. Then a gentle voice came from inside the bathroom. Are you sure, Officer Bradley? The woman asked. The entire night at that scene, neither my partner Mason nor I used our names out loud. Not once. Ma'am, do you need help or not? Mason was agitated. We need to know you're okay, so step back because I'm kicking it in. A part of me believes Mason was more eager to see the woman's face, to find out who she was and how she knew what she did, than he was for her safety. He wanted peace of mind. No, hold on, I said. She might be sitting right by the door. We don't want to hurt her. Then she said it. Officer Bradley, tell Mason that if he touches this door I will visit his family in the late hours of a certain night and break down a door of my own. The woman's voice was an octave deeper when she said that. I never understood the expression, white as a ghost. Do people actually turn that pale in the face? I learned that they in fact did when I saw my partner react to those sinister words. I couldn't stop him from kicking in that bedroom door this time. But when he did, we found nobody inside. There wasn't a window above the shower through which to escape or another door to go through. And yet, we were certain that we just had a full conversation with a woman behind this door. We scanned the entire house, including the backyard, one last time, inch by inch. Nothing. My partner and I communicated non-verbally the rest of the night. So when it was time to leave, we gave each other a look and left the house without even looking back. Now this is the part of the story I haven't told anyone. Not even Mason. We were sufficiently disturbed, so I didn't want to tell him what I'm about to tell you. When we left the house, I drove us back to the station that night. He probably thought I didn't notice, but his hands were shaking too much to drive comfortably. He doesn't drink coffee. As I reversed the cruiser out the street, Mason didn't look back at the house. But the truth is, I did, and I sincerely wish that I hadn't. I looked and squinted at a garbage can by the side of the house to see a strange, dark figure kneeling by the gate, as if watching us leave. And as we finally drove away, as the house became more and more distant in our mirror, the figure slowly stood itself up. And I'll swear even today that as it stood up, it didn't stop rising until its head peeked over the roof of that two-story house. The homeless in my neighborhood don't just want change. 2 whole years ago, my wife Angie and I decided it was finally time to buy a house. We knew it was anything but a buyer's market, but we were sick of paying triple what a mortgage would be in rent every month. I'm sure this story is familiar to some of you, and we went through every stage of disbelief, anger, and finally apathy after every competitive offer we put together was blown out of the water by a multinational investment corporation. I'm not mad about the process anymore, although it left me questioning where society was headed. How is this legal? I went to school. I paid off debt. I got a good job. I did everything right to still get priced out the fucking city I grew up in. Perhaps some anger remains, but after setting our sights on the city's less desirable neighborhoods, we finally got our home. On June 1st, we moved into a 4,500 square foot colonial. It had hardwood floors that patinated like leather, and the frosted plaster trim gave the ceilings the look of a wedding cake. The basement was a different story. It wasn't just unfinished, it was a dank hole in the ground, and scribbled on the walls were strange spirals and crude faces. Kids, the realtor had said like she knew who drew the markings. Fixing up the basement would be quite the value builder. So, sure, the kitchen had composite counters, and the basement needed a sign above the entrance that read, "Abandon all hope ye who enter here," but we had a home. And a damn big one at that. The catch was that it was a stone's throw from the freeway, and that the area was known for its crime more than anything else. Angie said it was just a stepping stone. We'd bank a year's worth of mortgage, hope the housing market keeps rocketing, and move again in a year. There were some flaws in her plan, mainly money, but I didn't say anything. I figured we'd both adjust to like it there. The first few weeks went smooth, and me and the wife got to unpacking and introducing ourselves to the neighbors. Maybe it was the threat of crime and that there was comfort and purpose in knowing who you lived next to, but whatever it was, our neighbors were incredibly friendly. We felt at home quick, and while there were some shocks, we made games out of them to take the fear away. With the pops that permeated the night, we had the game where we guessed whether the sound was fireworks or gunshots. When we passed large turds, one of us would point and we played human or dog. Unfortunately, after just a couple weeks at this game, we became experts at differentiating between these. Gunshots carry the sharp crack of the sound barrier being broken, while fireworks go boom or pop. As for the poop, let's just say that we hadn't seen any dogs large enough to lay landmines around town. There was a homeless problem there for sure, but they minded their own business. Our neighbors seemed to see right through them. They'd act as if they were ghosts, like they weren't even there. Hell, everyone did. I'd smile and say hello in passing. The least I could do was treat them like human beings. One night after a movie, I was at the sink washing the popcorn bowl. The window above looks out to our backyard, which was heavily wooded for a city lot. When it was dark out, I could only see a sliver of what was outside beyond the reflection of myself in the glass. I frowned at the shadow of a tall, dark stump. I don't remember a tree there. I swayed on my feet to see past my reflection. In between the bushes, nearly out of sight, a man was standing still, staring back at me. My heart leaped and I dropped the bowl where it crashed in the sink. "You okay in there, honey?" Angie shouted from the living room. "Yeah." I kept my eyes on the man and said nothing to Angie, not wanting to alarm her. "I'm gonna take the trash out." "Okay." I walked by the trash without touching it and opened the back door. "Hello." Outside, the wind was blowing hard, and the branches of the buckthorn the man stood behind were waving wildly as if to warn me. "What do you want?" I stepped forward to try and show I wasn't scared, but it was the tepid step of prey, like I was better planting my weight to run. The man said nothing. I took another step forward, more confidently this time, but jumped when my movement activated the motion light. I composed myself and yelled, "This is private property. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." Now this was the emptiest of threats, and everybody in the neighborhood knew it. The cops made a point to show up an hour late, if at all. The man walked forward a few paces to where I could see him better. He was very tall and wore a heavy wool overcoat that stretched all the way to his ankles. He kept walking towards me. My brain was shouting, but I froze in fear. "What do you want?" He stopped just in front of me. A white scar starred across his black skin just below the chin. He was at least 6'6", but the coat that ran the entire length of his body made him gigantic. His face was recently shaven and gaunt. He held out his fist at arm's length, and when he uncurled his fingers, cupped in his enormous palm was a pill. "I don't have any drugs," I said. His face didn't change any. There was no wonder or question in his eyes. "You want me to take it?" I pointed at his hand, but still his expression was static. I reached out and gently plucked the pill from his palm. I held it between my forefinger and thumb. It was just a pill capsule. Whatever had been inside had been emptied. "What do you want?" I asked again. He opened his mouth, revealing the severed stump of a tongue, and then he widened the enormous whites of his eyes. He began to mouth something, but being tongueless I couldn't tell what. But my blood cooled because I felt certain it was some kind of curse. "Please," I murmured. "Please leave." He turned and stepped into the night, and I watched the bushes sway in his wake as if he were a giant parting his way through the woods. The next day was Saturday, and I was determined to find out if anyone knew about this tall man. I walked to the strip mall and asked some of the homeless in the area, but as soon as I began to describe him, they all looked at the ground and shook their heads. The pattern was repeated with every other homeless person I tried to talk to. On my way home, I stopped by 2 men working on a car at the end of a driveway. "Hey," I started over to them. "This may sound a little crazy, but do you know of a tall fella around here that wears a giant coat?" They both started laughing. Sorry to waste your time. I turned to go. No. One of them was waving me back. You talking about a really big motherfucker? The man raised his hand to signify. Yay hi, black coat, nasty scars. Yeah, I nodded. Well, that's Tall Frank. What you wanna about him? You see him in your recycling? No, why? Tall Frank's a con man. He makes his living that way. I nodded. He was acting weird in my backyard last night. Weird how? Was he just looking like his weird self? No, he was staring at me from outside. When I went out he tried to say something, or mouth something. Both of their brows rose. You saying that Tall Frank tried to communicate with you? Yeah. They both looked at each other. Tall Frank talks to nobody. And by talks I mean communicating in any kind of way. He cut his own throat to never talk again. The other chimed in. That's just a rumor. Tall Frank showed up in this neighborhood 20 years ago. No one knows where he came from and the man can't tell you. Yeah, people put all kinds of legend to those scars. Some say it was dog that bit him. But I never seen no dog that'll slice your tongue out. If he doesn't communicate with anyone, how come he has the name Tall Frank? Well, that's what my mama would call him. He leaned closer to me. She used to tell me to watch my tongue or Tall Frank will take it. He chuckled to himself. What do you think he wanted with me? They both shrugged. No clue, but you be sure to tell us when you find out. They bent back to their work and I thanked them and went on far less assured than when I'd first set out. The next several days there was no sign of Tall Frank, but I began to fall ill. It was a headache at first, but soon I had heart palpitations and body aches that I almost let take me to the emergency room. I assured myself that there was no such thing as curses. Why was I letting one strange encounter with a homeless man dominate my every thought? Angie was working late recently and when I had the house to myself at night, I would stand at the kitchen window and stare into the backyard. I was obsessed and it wasn't long before I saw him again. I was wrapped in a blanket filling the teapot at the sink when I saw him standing in the same place as before. I dropped the pot and ran to the back door. Hey, my head felt light and I was in that same kind of drunken state where your fear hardly speaks to you. I scampered through the backyard over to him. What do you want with me? Tall Frank was staring at me. He gestured with his scarred neck for me to follow. I looked down at my bare feet, but he was already walking. Hey, just leave us alone. I stepped cautiously after him. When I got past the bushes where I could see the alley, I saw him standing near the trash cans. I ran after him. Hugh, I don't ever want to see you back here again. With our difference in size and the blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I'm sure I looked to him like some angry hobbit. He certainly didn't act intimidated and I can't blame him. Tall Frank crossed the alley and sat on a crumbling retaining wall. He gently tapped the stone next to him for me to sit. I'm not fucking sitting. He reached into his breast pocket and paused before pulling out an envelope. Then he put the letter in his other hand and reached in again and pulled out another. What are those? He extended the envelopes to me. His long arm nearly stretched the entire alley. I approached the letters cautiously, snatching them and stepping back. What are these? I muttered, already distracted. They had both been opened and I took the papers out of one of the envelopes. It was a handwritten letter on college-ruled paper. All the ink was smeared like it had been dunked in water, but I could still read it, albeit slowly. When I was done reading, I let my arm fall down to my side and stared at Tall Frank in disbelief. Angie had a lover. I looked at the other envelope and hardly had to read it to figure it out. The letter had read, Atlantic Life Insurance. A policy had been opened in my name for $250,000. I stumbled over to the retaining wall and sat. The pills. I thought about the empty capsule he'd shown me that I tossed aside. It was my emergency albuterol. It had to be. A quick WebMD search showed that an overdose started with symptoms of headaches and heart palpitations. Angie is trying to kill me. Suddenly I realized Tall Frank's arm was around me and he was patting my shoulder paternally. We sat there in silence for a long time. The things you can learn from people's recycling, I said. Tall Frank nodded and we watched the upstairs light turn on and my wife appeared in the window. She twisted something in her fingers and then tapped it into a mug. A minute later I heard the back door open. Honey, are you out here? Angie called. I made you some tea. I guess the homeless around her don't always want change. Sometimes they might want to save your life. My wife tried to cheat on me, but then something horrible happened. Sure, I wasn't the greatest husband in the world, but did that give Amanda the right to meet up behind my back with a strange man from Tinder? Not that she got to actually follow through with the cheating, of course. You see, on that fateful night, despite telling me she was seeing a movie with her friends, Amanda left the house to meet up with her internet Prince Charming, Josh, at a bar. And what did she get instead? She crashed head-on into a telephone pole at the bar, her shitty little Chevy crumpling like a tissue full of snot. Her spine followed suit, paralyzing her from the waist down. With a quick crash of metal on wood, she went from stepping out on me to never stepping again. The police called me to a bar instead of a theater, and the truth of what she was up to eventually came out. It was like the crippling of her body also destroyed her ability to lie to me. Of course, with Amanda's lower half out of order, suddenly Josh lost all interest in her. I guess he wasn't the most perfect man in the world just because he liked the same music she did. That left her no other choice but to come crawling back to me. Once she came home from the hospital, I pretended that I would stick around a few days to get her on her feet, but then I would be gone forever. I can make it up to you, she whimpered. Please don't leave me alone. I told her that things would have to change. She would have to start pulling her weight. Understandably, that weight was a lot more than it had been before she tried to cheat on me. She agreed. She would do anything, she said. I promised Amanda that we'd make the house wheelchair accessible eventually, but she needed to prove herself to me first. That's been a bit problematic, as she occasionally spills my breakfast while dragging herself up the stairs to bring it to me. It's a repulsive thing to see, but I'm patient with her. Eventually, I decided to take Amanda back to the bar where it happened. I rolled her to the spot of impact and dumped her out of her chair. Kiss the pavement, I instructed. Show your appreciation for the beautiful event that saved our marriage. She started to cry. As she cried, I thought about Josh. Josh was a random picture from the internet, chosen for his blue eyes and abs, two features that I knew she loved. His messages were from me, pretending to be the man of her dreams. A perfect, handsome man on the internet that liked all the random things she did and talked to her exactly the way she wanted to be talked to. Not only did she fail my loyalty test, but she was clearly dumb as hell. She's lucky I put up with her. My girlfriend is always comparing me to her ex-boyfriend, so I made her choose. So I have been with my girlfriend Chloe for the last 2 years. We are in a really happy relationship and I have even considered marrying her in the near future. The only issue I have with her is that she is constantly comparing me to her ex-boyfriend Mark. It is really annoying and it is kinda starting to hurt my feelings. If I ever do something wrong, then she would always point out that Mark wouldn't have made that mistake. I know that they were childhood sweethearts and were together for over 10 years, but I really think she needs to stop doing this. She always gives me the silent treatment afterwards when I ask her to stop, which always make me feel like I did something wrong. It has really started to get on my nerves, so I decided to organize a meeting between the three of us and make her choose which of us she wants. I knew she would be home late on Sunday evening, so I decided that was the perfect day for the meeting. Me and Mark were sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in. I could see the look of shock on her face when she saw him. She fainted to the ground and I knew that she wanted Mark. I decided I would stand aside and let them be together. I placed Mark's rotting corpse back into his grave and then carefully lowered Chloe on top of him. Before closing the coffin, I started throwing the dirt on top of the grave so that no one would ever know it was disturbed. I could hear Chloe's screams of what I assume were joy as she was finally reunited with the love of her life. I felt horrible that we were breaking up but didn't want to stand in the way of true love. We've been locked in our classroom for days, and our teacher is starting to act very strange. Day 1. We had just opened our textbooks to Chapter 8 when the alarms blared overhead. A red strobing light spun by the door as metal slats slid down the wall to seal us in. The others started to stir and panic at their desks. No, class, I'm sure everything is fine. Probably just a drill. Mr. Jonas held up his hands in an attempt to soothe the crowd. Just as he was about to open his mouth, Evie came over the intercom. Level 3 contagion located in the south quadrant of campus. Lockdown protocol is now in effect. Isolation protocol is now in effect. Oh no. The teacher suddenly looked pale and a little panicked himself. Day 3. I slid my rook across the tiled chessboard to overtake Patricia's bishop. She stuck out her tongue in defiance as I removed it from the board. I smirked and then shoved another saltine cracker in my mouth. Mr. Jonas said we shouldn't be in here much longer. It was probably just taking the CDC a while to quarantine and eradicate the contagion. He said it must be a pretty nasty virus if they are keeping us locked in our classrooms. We have enough snacks for another day or so. It's been difficult to ration properly when all you have are crackers, candy, and canned spray cheese. Overall, though, we were keeping our hopes up, which was all we could really do. Staying positive, for now. Day 5. The room was starting to smell foul. We designated some buckets in the corner as the bathrooms and they were about half full and beyond putrid. We ran out of food last night. My stomach rumbled with hunger, but I did my best to ignore it. I didn't feel like playing chess or reading anymore. Instead, I just napped at my desk as much as possible to pass the time. I was hoping at any moment I'd be awoken to the doors opening so that I could go home. I missed my parents. Mr. Jonas was losing his composure too. He'd been pretty put together up to this point in ensuring we were all calm. But his eyes looked a little wild now, and he kept pacing the room talking to himself. A few times I heard him cursing under his breath and then reciting prayers. I really hope we get out of here soon. Day 8. Bang ... bang ... bang. A pounding sound coming from the other side of the classroom pulled me from my dreams. Bang ... bang ... bang. I stayed still to appear asleep but cracked my eyes just enough to watch as the biology teacher smashed a chair against the steel door over and over again. Bang ... bang ... bang. He was really losing it. Let us out of here. Mr. Jonas screamed as he tossed the chair to the side. I cannot do that, sir. A level 3 contagion has been detected. I have sealed off the affected area, but you must stay isolated for your safety. The robotic voice hummed over the speakers. He screeched profanities at the camera in the corner of the ceiling. Some of the other boys were becoming aggressive as well. There had been some fights the last couple of mornings. Also, some hands going where they shouldn't be going, back behind the fake plants and lab equipment. It seemed as if we were slowly devolving, becoming an enclosure of chimpanzees, like one you'd see at the zoo but only hungrier. We needed out, or something terrible was going to happen. Day 10. We'd been on a diet of tap water for the past 5 days. I felt dizzy every time I stood from my desk. The room would spin and I'd almost black out. I kept my footing by sheer force of willpower. I had this irrational fear that if I passed out, I'd be eaten by my classmates, like a pack of hyenas on a gazelle, feasting on my intestines as they spilled across the tiled floor. It sounded crazy if I said it out loud, but when I looked around the room and saw all the hungry faces, I didn't think the idea was too far-fetched after all. Mr. Jonas hasn't said a word in over 12 hours. He's just been sitting at his desk, carving something into the surface of it with an X-Acto knife. For the first time today, I had the thought that maybe we weren't going to make it out of this. Maybe we were all going to die in this classroom. I hung my head and cried. Day 13. Mr. Jonas, stop. Micah cried. Don't you see? We have to do this. We need food. It's survival 101. When the pack is suffering and food is scarce, they turn on their weakest member. It's simple biology. Survival of the fittest. Mr. Jonas had his hands around Trevor's neck, squeezing so hard that the boy's eyes were about to pop from his skull. Trevor struggled beneath him, but he was frail and terribly small for his age. Micah grabbed a large beaker from the table and lifted it high over his head. Mr. Jonas, stop now. Don't make me do this. But the teacher was long gone. His eyes gleamed with delight as drool dripped down his chin from salivating at the thought of a meal. I jumped to my feet as Micah brought the beaker down as hard as he could onto Mr. Jonas' head. It shattered to pieces on impact, knocking the teacher out cold. I helped Micah push him off Trevor. The poor kid was wheezing and gasping for air as tears streamed down his face. "You're all right? It's okay, you're all right." Micah patted the kid on the back, trying to calm him as he wailed. Suddenly there was a scream like a war cry and Mr. Jonas was airborne. He leaped across a desk and plowed into Micah. They both went sprawling across the tile. Micah resisted him, but Mr. Jonas ended up on top and began dropping his elbows viciously on Micah's face, causing blood to spew from his nose and mouth. Static filled my mind. I didn't think, I only reacted. I reached down and picked up a hunk of glass from the broken beaker, grabbed Mr. Jonas' shaggy hair and pulled it back to extend his neck. I pulled the glass through the meat of his throat as hard as I could. I'd never seen so much blood before. It poured in a waterfall across Micah's chest. Mr. Jonas fell to the side once more, this time never to get up again. I stared at my blood-soaked hands. I felt nothing. No remorse, no fear, only static. Suddenly the metal slats retracted into the ceiling and the door swung open. Lockdown protocol has been lifted. Please continue with your regular schedules. Lockdown protocol has been lifted. Her cheery robotic voice seemed so distant and out of place now. The other students gathered around me, just staring at the pool of blood. I think it was the hunger talking, but a part of me wanted to know what it tasted like. I think the others did too. Thankfully, before that could happen, a man in a suit strolled into the classroom. "Hello, class." His perfect teeth gleamed under the LEDs. Before we could say anything, a team of adults in overalls poured into the room. Some began taking pictures of everything. Others started cleaning up Mr. Jonas. One man with gray hair dropped a large box on the teacher's desk and opened it. He then started throwing fresh fruit and granola bars to each of the students. We devoured everything he gave us. I started to feel more like myself after 2 bananas and 4 granola bars. They tasted like heaven, a sweet salvation. The first man with the nice teeth in the expensive suit waited until we were all done before he addressed us again. "I know it's been a long 13 days, guys. I appreciate you all hanging in there. I've alerted each of your parents that you've been cleared to go home." The classroom erupted in cheers as we all hugged each other. Even Micah, covered in gore, danced around excitedly. "You'll all be able to go home soon, but first I just need to do a little debrief with each of you before you go. I'm going to set up in the counselor's office, and Mr. Moses here is going to bring you down one by one to give your account on what happened here during isolation." We all nodded our heads in agreement, anything to get out of here. Mr. Moses, the man with the gray hair and the snacks, took us down one by one and we spilled our guts to the man with the nice teeth. When I gave my story on what it was like, I still felt numb. Even when describing how I'd killed Mr. Jonas, I just felt nothing. It wasn't until I'd gotten home that evening that I'd broken down and wept. Once I was in my mother's arms, I cried and cried until I couldn't anymore. Then I ate more food than I ever had. I shoveled pasta down my throat until I thought my stomach would burst. It was a good feeling. To be full. To be human again. Years later, while I was at university, a whistleblower had leaked that what we'd endured at the school was a government cover-up for a top-secret experiment. There had been no virus, no contagion. It began as an experiment to test the artificial intelligence system they had at the school. But then it morphed into a social experiment to see how long we would last before someone was murdered or severely harmed. To test the boundaries of civility and moral character under immense pressure, just in case there was a real issue with the code in the AI. And this scenario became a reality elsewhere. When I'd killed Mr. Jonas, it had ended the experiment. The news had made me sick to my stomach. I was angry and disgusted for weeks. I was okay with it now though. You see, Trevor may have been small, the weakest member of the pride perhaps, but he was also a genius. With his hacking expertise, we were able to locate Mr. Nice Teeth and Mr. Moses. It's been 6 days so far, and every time they scream and hit the door with a chair, I just can't help but smile. It's a little experiment a few of us are conducting. It'll end when someone is murdered or severely injured. Maybe. My son asked me to check the closet for monsters. I didn't need to. I recently went through a pretty nasty divorce, but I got the only thing that mattered out of it: full custody of my 4-year-old son. Lost nearly everything else in the process, so we had to relocate to a new house with barely any luggage or furniture. Truly a fresh new start. I heard him call for me during our first night at our new home. It was a little after midnight, I think. I went to check on him to see what was wrong and sat by his bedside. He was wide awake and asked me to check the closet for monsters, which wasn't surprising given the circumstances. He's still just a little kid, and without even taking into account all the crap he's been put through thanks to my shitty marriage, moving into an unfamiliar, barely furnished home must be a lot to take in for someone his age. And you know how they say that your brain always stays half awake when you're sleeping in a new environment, right? That's all pretty much what went through my mind in a flash as soon as my son spoke. It was no big deal. It was all normal, I thought. But something else almost immediately clicked inside my brain, before I even got to look at where my son had pointed to while he made his innocent request. Something was wrong. I turned my head and looked, and it took everything I had in me to not give in to fear and terror, all for the sake of my son. When you become a parent, you have to protect your children no matter what, always putting yourself in harm's way if necessary, and spare them any and all kinds of things that might hurt them. That's why I didn't freak out. I couldn't, not when we had barely just started our new life. I had to protect him, and at that point in time as I sat on his bed I only knew one thing. We had to leave the room. We had to leave the house immediately. "All right, champ," of course I said, faking bravery. Then I made a request of my own as I lowered my voice and got closer to him. "Hey, how about you step outside for a minute? If there's a monster in there, I'll have to kick its butt all over your room." He chuckled and said okay. I made sure to put some extra emphasis on the word but because it's something that always cracks him up when I say it. Fortunately he got stuck on that and not the fact that I was indirectly admitting to the possibility of there actually being a monster. As soon as he left the room my mind raced as it started to put together the best and most efficient route to take him out of the house while picking my car keys and phone on our way out. When I heard the closet doors slowly creaking open behind me I knew it was time to go. I jumped out of the bed, exited the room and grabbed my son. We were out of the door and inside the car and moving in under a minute. I told him I couldn't sleep so we were going out for some ice cream to celebrate. He was a little taken aback and asked celebrate what, to which I replied just us two together, I love you buddy. It was by no means a lie, but I just had to make sure that he was alright and wouldn't think of anything else as we literally fled our new home. As I mentioned earlier, the house was a new environment for the two of us. I'd been there a couple of times before, cleaned it all up by myself and assembled what little furniture we had, so I knew for a fact what belonged where and what didn't. And I know his room didn't have a closet. My husband's family keep trying to pressure us to have children even after we have told them we don't want any. So I have been with my husband Adam for the last 4 years and we have been married for the last 2. We both work very busy jobs and live comfortably well within our means. The only downside to our relationship is that he has a very invasive family who love to interfere in our marriage. They tried to take control of our wedding and force us to invite people we didn't want. We had to threaten to uninvite them for them to leave us alone. Ever since we have gotten married they have been constantly telling us that we need to have children so that our lives will finally be complete. I keep having to tell them that we have no intention of having children and then they try and make me feel guilty for not continuing on their family name. A couple of weeks ago I discovered that we were pregnant. Adam was stunned as we were using multiple types of birth control. Unfortunately, my sister-in-law found out about the baby as she found the pregnancy test while snooping in our house. Their entire family started congratulating us and posting on social media before we even had a chance to tell anyone. They planned a party without consulting us and were arguing over the baby names they wanted. Adam and I started being pressured to organize a gender reveal party. We finally relented to shut them up. I got my sister involved and told her exactly how I wanted the party to go. The party was a complete nightmare as his family wouldn't leave us alone the entire time. They brought us gifts we didn't want and kept making inappropriate suggestions to us about how I should predominantly breastfeed. My sister had a pinata which we had to hit to reveal the gender. I volunteered to smash it open and could see the eagerness on my mother-in-law's face as she waited to see the results. I took a massive swing and the pinata cracked open revealing its contents. I could see the confusion on everyone's faces as they gazed down at what lay on the ground. My mother-in-law fainted after I picked up the fetus and announced it had been a boy. I found out how my wife copes with the death of our son. There was nothing special about that particular night. Nothing at all. The TV was blaring in the living room and the dishes clattered in the kitchen with the promise of dinner. My eldest son Jeremy was sitting cross-legged on the floor and mashing the controller buttons with a force that made me wonder whether the plastic knobs or his thumbs would give out first. Grappling with the thought of a dislocated finger likely being cheaper to fix, I rattled the ice in my whiskey glass and cleared my throat for good measure. Hey, lay off, Jer, remember what happened to the last one? The last one was still sitting on the garage table, waiting for me to do something about it. Jeremy had thrown one of his fits and smashed it to pieces against the wall. We didn't bug him too much about it back then, as it had only been 2 weeks since the passing of our youngest child and we were all going through something similar. It's funny to think how much coping mechanisms can vary from person to person. Some turn to alcohol, drowning themselves in liquor every night until the consequences of their drunken behavior finally catch up to them. Others take to violence, gritting their teeth through every social interaction until the buildup is finally enough to punch a hole through the wall. Then, there's the type that confines themselves to their room and refuses to come out under any circumstances. The latter was our daughter, Macy, by the way. She was only 14, and yet it somehow felt like she hadn't been a part of our family for a while. When she wasn't at school, she spent all of her time locked away in her room, on the computer, or with her head under the covers. We'd long since given up trying to coax her out and resorted to bringing her dinner plate upstairs and leaving it by her door. I nursed my drink thoughtfully, watching Jeremy swing and miss at a giant orc. Fuck, he screamed, his shoulders tensing visibly as the frail elven creature he was playing as was lifted off its feet and slammed into the ground. Fuck this stupid game. Not wanting to end up with another hole in the wall, I scrambled to my feet and pried the controller out of my son's hands. He resisted at first, but my solemn expression seemed to ground him. Time out, Jer, I said, go set the table. Dinner's almost ready. I had no way of knowing this, of course, as my wife was doing the cooking that night, but I had to say something. Plus, I knew it would take a while to set the table just the way my wife liked it. Set an extra place tonight, my wife Lily said, coming into the dining room, her cheeks flushed. Why? Jeremy stared at her. Is Macy going to eat with us? My interest was piqued too, and I wondered if this meant we were going to take the first step towards being a family again. Yes, Lily's lips pursed into a thin line. Yes, she is. We stared at her in disbelief. To my knowledge, Macy hadn't been downstairs in over 3 months. Aside from her quick disappearances out the front door, I never saw her at all. and most of the time I miss those altogether. How on earth had my wife convinced her to join us for dinner? I suppose I've been putting off giving any details about my wife. You see, the loss has affected her in a slightly different way. In a sense, I feel like talking about her coping mechanism could potentially drive a permanent rift between us and destroy what is left of our marriage. That being said, I'm not entirely sure there's anything left. Ever since the day our son died, she's been detached from reality. I suppose in a way, we all were, but my wife was different. She couldn't or wouldn't come to terms with the fact that Kendall was gone. No, not in the way you're thinking. She didn't sit on the edge of her bed, crying for hours. Nor did she spend every waking moment surrounded by photo albums or toys or clothes. In fact, she didn't cry or dwell on it at all. Instead, she carried the urn around. She carried it around and talked to it as if it were a real person. Comfortable, she strapped it into the baby seat of our car just the other week. I watched her through the rear view mirror, my skin prickling. Needless to say, I didn't like going out with my wife. She turned heads wherever she went. The grocery store, the spa, the bank. She was undoubtedly known as the crazy lady with the urn. She insisted we set a place for our son every time we sat down to eat. Instead of talking to the rest of the family, she'd have conversations with the urn over dinner. It's a wonder she didn't try to feed it as well. At this point, I had no idea who Lily was. Our formerly prosperous marriage had quickly declined into one of convenience, and I often found myself fantasizing about other women. Once my side of the bed had been occupied, I was banished to sleep on the downstairs couch, so I could use the TV to satisfy my own needs without judgment. I'm sure my wife wouldn't have noticed if I'd started bringing dates home, but I never did, secretly hoping a day would come when things went back to normal. Macy's going to eat with us, Jeremy repeated, his hand frozen in midair. His angry composure seemed to have vanished as quickly as it had appeared. For a moment, the room was enveloped in stunned silence. Then, Lily spoke. Yes, she will be joining us from now on. My heart fluttered as hope filled my lungs. It was finally happening. I could almost feel the broken pieces of our family slithering towards the dining room table from every corner of the house to form a long-lost family unit. Dinner is almost ready, Lily blurted out, turning on her heel and heading towards the kitchen. I'll just get Kendall. I got up to pour myself another drink. Of course, she would get Kendall. Of course, things couldn't just go back to normal instantly. It would take time. Even so, as she brought out the urn and sat it on top of the plate, followed by a light kiss on the lid, I knew I could never get used to this. Shall I call Macy? I asked. Has my wife reappeared with a serving dish, or will you? A strange expression crossed her face. She stood there, motionless, as though she was thinking long and hard about what to say. I swallowed, wondering if she hadn't heard my question. No, she retorted eventually, she'll join us when she's ready. And that was that. Neither Jeremy nor I questioned it any further, instead tucking into the dinner Lily had prepared for us. We didn't say a word throughout. My wife, on the other hand, said plenty. Enjoying your peas, Kenny? She asked the urn amidst bites. They're fresh from the garden, just how you like them. Remember when we used to pick them together at Grandma's? She taught me how to plant them, too, before she passed away last year. I stared at my plate, my stomach in knots. I needed another drink, badly, but the bottle was in the living room. I wondered if I could slip away quietly to fetch it when Jeremy piped up. When's Macy coming down? He asked, arranging his peas in a straight line. We're almost done with dinner. My wife looked like she'd been jolted awake from a pleasant dream. As she began, her cheeks flushing. Oh, Macy. Yeah, perhaps another day. We stared at her, bewildered, but she seemed totally oblivious to our change in demeanor, chatting away to Kendall about rhubarb and its benefits on the body. Mom, Jeremy asked again, his voice quivering, why won't Macy come down? It was like she hadn't even heard him. Either that, or she was doing her best to not pay attention. Clearly, it was a subject she didn't want to address. What's your favorite vegetable, sweetie? She giggled, her tone suddenly cold, as if she didn't mean a word of what she was saying. Mom, Jeremy sat upright in his chair and waved a hand in front of her face. Where the fuck's Macy? I tensed up, knowing full well Jeremy wasn't supposed to speak to his mother that way, but the situation seemed to be spiraling out of control before I could stop it. Why can't you just talk to us every once in a while, huh? He exploded. If you spent half the time with us that you spend with that stupid thing, then maybe we would still be a family. Caught in a fit of rage, Jeremy grasped his end of the tablecloth and pulled it towards him, sending the dishes crashing to the floor. Kendall's urn, sitting atop one of the plates, succumbed to the same fate. Crash, clatter, crack. Kenny, my wife screeched, leaping to her feet and dashing around the dining table. Baby. I craned my neck to look over the damage. Amidst the porcelain shards and utensils, the urn lay cracked in half, its lid nowhere to be found. It was empty. Kendall. Lily landed knees first on the shards, the porcelain crunching under her weight. Nothing could have prepared me for what she did next. Jeremy and I watched in horror as my frantic wife snatched one half of the urn and stuck her tongue out to lick it, her fingers desperately searching for any remains left on the floor. She swept her hands across the ground, cutting her skin up in the process, and shoved the whole lot into her mouth, her eyes rolling back inside her head. I wanted to vomit. No, I wanted to run. My heart was pounding at 10 times its normal rate, threatening to leap out of my throat. My skin was clammy and my vision blurred, but not enough to stop me from seeing the monster that was my wife, stuffing ashes, blood, and porcelain shards down her throat. Jeremy must have felt the same way, but I couldn't see him, my tunnel vision only allowing the image of Lily and her feast. "Mom," I heard him cry, his voice a mixture of terror and disgust. He didn't say anything else either, making do with only a gargled gasp and short, rapid pants. There was nothing to say. Even now that I look back on it, I cannot think of a single coherent sentence that would have befitted the circumstances. I knew instantly that my wife was gone and I'd never be able to see her the same way. Grabbing Jeremy by the arm, I tugged him away from the table, leaving Lily scavenging the floor. I needed to save my children. I'd get Macy out of her room whether she cooperated or not and take them both to my parents' house. At least that way I'd know they were safe before I dealt with my wife, or what was left of her. Jeremy was still in shock as I pulled him up the stairs, so he didn't protest. He seemed to know exactly what we were about to do and I needed all the help I could get. Macy had never been easy to deal with and I knew it would take some time to convince her we had to get out now. Time we did not have. But as we barged in through the door of her bedroom, I instantly knew my plan wasn't going to work out. The room was empty. The bed was made without a single crease, the computer was off, and the desk was arranged neatly as if it were only there for show rather than a part of someone's living space. A large, maroon urn sat in the middle of it. I didn't need to ask. I already knew what happened. She had run out. My wife thinks our daughter's death is her fault. We were driving down the highway on a cold winter morning, going slowly because we both knew how treacherous the ice could be when the vehicle swerved. Up became down, then up again as we tumbled down a steep embankment, held in place only by our seatbelts. At some point the windshield shattered and my wife, Alice, cracked her skull against the dashboard. A paramedic found me sitting in the snow, cut in a dozen places. A trail of blood connected me with the car, which had come to a stop on its side, pinched in a narrow ravine. Still in a state of shock, I told the officer I'd tried hoisting an unconscious Alice out of the driver's seat but couldn't get her past the passenger's side door. After the surgery, she woke up screaming for our daughter. She could only recall confused glimpses of events leading up to the accident. The doctors asked me whether I should explain what happened or let them do it. I opted for the former. I went into her room and held her soft hand. She barely reacted to the news, and who could blame her? It must have been one hell of a blow, waking up to discover your child died in a terrible crash and that you were the one driving. I simply couldn't face that kind of guilt. Back home, the Alice of before became a distant memory. Her hair was constantly plastered across her forehead in sweaty clumps, her eyes perpetually red and puffed out. Friends and family stopped by, reaffirming nobody was to blame, that it could happen to anyone. But you could tell by the waver in their voices and how quickly each of them departed that they didn't honestly believe this. In the weeks that followed, Alice was rarely without a beer or a cigarette. Her face appeared different now, and not only because of the scarring, it was the eyes. They'd lost something. One night, in the lounge, as I gathered up empty tins and a full ashtray, her hand snatched my wrist. Then she leaned forward in her armchair and said, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer truthfully." She stared at me. She was serious. She must have been building up to this for a while. "Do you blame me for what happened?" For a moment neither of us spoke, and that hesitation was enough, I think. As I silently shuffled away, she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I found her the next morning surrounded by empty pill bottles, a goodbye letter by her side. It said she loved me but couldn't live with the guilt any longer. My wife wanted to hear me say I didn't blame her for our daughter's death, but the fact is I could never do that. Because had I revealed I didn't hold her responsible, she might have begun to wonder who was really behind the wheel that morning. There's someone pretending to be my sister downstairs in my house. It has her voice, but I don't think it's really her. By Eddie. My mother calls up to me from downstairs. I take my rightmost headphone off my ear, and I pick up the sound of the general bustle in the downstairs hallway. I can hear my dad and my sister laughing to each other as coats are taken from the rack. "Bye," I call back, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. The game goes on. "Are you sure you don't want to come?" My mom calls up. "It could be fun. Fun family outing." I roll my eyes. "I'm good, Mom. Bye." My sister calls up too. "Come on, Eddie. Don't sit around in the house like a loser all day." "Goodbye." I shout down again. "All right, see you soon." My mom replies, "Later, loser." Louise calls, though it's good-natured, really. We do get on. I can hear Mom gently chiding her, though I can't make out the words. I sure do recognize that tone, though. Their voices fade out and the footsteps soften. The front door is drawn closed. I hear the sound of my mom locking the door up behind her. Awesome. Some peace, at last. Don't have to worry about anyone barging in and interrupting. I return my headphone to my ear and reinvest my full attention to the matter at hand. Securing a victory. Gotta keep my current ranking. A second loss in a row and my score will tank. Can't afford that right now. Click, click, click. I tap away at the keys. Explosions rattle in my ears as I navigate the environment. Fully engrossed, muscle tensed as I do my best. At last bringing the round to a close. I clap my hands in victory and lean back, the chair squeaking as I do so. I slide off my headphones and take a moment to revel in the victory, listening to the soft patter of the rain against the window. The day is gray and overcast. Wind sighs gently in the trees on the street outside. I glance at the clock. Damn, it's been almost an hour already. How time flies. I spin around in my chair, drumming my fingers against the desk. I catch a quick reflection of myself in the screen as it loads. Sat at my computer, just like you probably are right now. Or maybe you're on your phone. Same difference. Connected, engaged, and yet, for now, alone. The rain patters, and the game freezes. The loading circle becomes stuck mid-turn. I try to shake the mouse, but that too has become frozen. Fuck's sake, I mutter, tapping the S key. Nothing. It's as I'm going for Control plus Alt plus Delete that I hear a noise from downstairs. Sounded like a cupboard door being shut. Instantly I find myself suppressing a wave of panic. It's fascinating, really, how quickly one's level of alertness can change. All my senses are primed and I become hyper-aware of the sound of my breathing, of the beating of my heart. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe the sound was something else. Did it come from outside? But as I listen, it comes again. Another cupboard, and then what sounds like the fridge. It's okay, don't panic. Don't panic. Serial killers don't go looking through cupboards and fridges, do they? I creep to my door and slowly, gently, steadily ease it open, slipping out into the corridor and tiptoeing to the banisters of the stairs, listening out for some more clues. I hold my breath, and then, as I hear water start flowing into the sink, I allow myself to relax a little. Killers don't wash their hands before a murder. What would be the point? I'm summoning the courage to call down when I hear a voice call up first. All my tensions are relaxed at once, as the voice is my sister's. "Hi Eddie, I've got some food for you down here." I call back, "Oh great. Did you stop at the cookie place on your way back? Please tell me you got the caramel ones." There is a pause. "Come down and see," she replies, as I hear stuff being moved about on the counter. "Alright, give me a sec." I shout down, heading back into my room to force restart my computer. I take another look at the clock. I think to myself, they haven't been out very long. I wonder why they came back. Maybe the rain. I press and hold down the power button, then return through my door to the top of the stairs. "How come you guys are back so early?" I call out. There is no response. The door to my parents' room is open. I glance through it to see the rain wash gently down the window at the room's far side. For some reason unknown to me at this stage, unease creeps quietly into the back of my head. "Louise," I call down, still hesitating by the banisters. "Where's Mom and Dad?" There is another silence. I walk the length of the hallway, passing by a little window to the street outside. My parents' car, it would seem, has not returned. I continue on until I am stood at the top of the stairs, looking down them and into the hall below. The lights are all still switched off, and an unsettling aura seeps up the steps from the shadows beneath. "Come on down, Eddie," comes my sister's voice from somewhere unseen. "The kitchen, I think. Come see what I have for you." I cannot hear the sound of cupboards now. There is no rustling, no movement of any objects or bags or jingling of keys. My sister finishes speaking, and then there is silence. Silence and the gentle patter of the rain. My hands, I realize, are sweating. What the hell is this? I think to myself, "Eddie, come on man, just pull yourself together." But something compels me to remain where I stand. Some unseen force keeps me from taking a step down onto the stairs and descending to the bottom floor. "Louise," I try to call back, but my voice fails me. It does not project the way I intended. I clear my throat, though my mouth is dried. The sensation is an uncomfortable one. "Eddie," comes the reply. "Eddie, come downstairs." "When did you get back?" I manage to call down, "Where's the car?" Silence. "Louise." I call down again, unsure of what else to say. And then, a moment later, from around the corner, my sister walks slowly and deliberately into view. She stops at the bottom of the stairs, still shrouded in shadow, and she looks up to me. We hold each other's gaze for a moment, her at the base of the steps, and I at the top. She does not speak, and her expression shifts to a wide grin. Her teeth appear very white in the darkness. She makes a quick motion with one of her hands. "Follow," is the implication, and then she turns and walks slowly back to the kitchen, out of sight. It is not until I cannot see her that her voice comes again. "Come on, Eddie. Come and see what I have to show you." The hairs on the back of my neck all raise in cold alarm. I do not follow. With my jaw clenched and blood frozen in my veins, I make a hasty retreat to my room where I close the door shut, perhaps just a little too quickly. The thud of the door going into its frame reverberates around the walls. Less than 1 second later, in that exact same instant, I hear the unmistakable sound of something barreling up the stairs, knocking carelessly into the banisters with rapid, ascending creaks and clamoring. I cry out loud in terror, and with a surge of adrenaline I grab hold of my chest of drawers. I haul it across the floor into place, blocking the door. My potted plant falls and lands with a dull thump by my feet, soil spilling out across the carpet. My heart hammers in my chest as I stare at the door, tensed and waiting for the handle to start rattling. Waiting for something to throw itself against the door from the opposite side. My sister. But none of those things happen. The minutes tick by, excruciatingly slowly. The sounds of the sudden race up the stairs ended as quickly as they began, and with the utmost caution, I tentatively press my ear against the wood, listening, breathing deep, straining to hear for any sign or clue as to what the fuck is going on. "Open the door, Eddie," my sister's voice whispers from the other side. I leap back from the door in horror, fumbling around on my desk for my phone, too afraid to look away. I grab it and tap in the passcode, my shaking fingers failing the password the first time. In the second, the thing on the other side of the door does not knock. It does not try to force its way in. It only repeats itself. "Eddie, stop screwing around. Open the door and let me in. I have something to show you." I try to call my mom first. I bring the phone up to my ear, shaking. The line is engaged. "Fuck. Come on, Eddie, open the door. I want to show you something." "Louise," I reply at last, my voice trembling. "You're freaking me the fuck out. If this is a prank, just stop, okay? Just stop. Open the door, Eddie. Open up and let me in. You need to see this, please, come with me. Please, if it's a prank I forgive you, just stop messing with me." Silence, and then, "Just come downstairs. You need to come downstairs with me. Just follow. Screw this." Next up, I call the police. An overreaction, perhaps, but better safe than sorry. The tone sounds through the phone, there's a click, then, 911, what's your emergency? I take a deep breath. "Hello?" 911 comes through the phone. "There's an intruder in my house," I whisper at last, as quietly as I can. though evidently my sister hears. Her voice has risen in pitch. I don't think she likes this development. Eddie, you need to open the door. Let me in. You need to open the door. You need to open the door. Let me in. This is really important. Really important. Something about the way she says those final words sets my teeth on edge. It wasn't slurred as such. Just, ugh. I don't know how to describe it. As if the muscles for her speech, I guess, were getting tired. But despite my fear, I do my best to ignore her, and I provide my details to the person on the line. The rain starts hammering down against the glass, and the wind picks up too. Okay, sir, they say after I have told them my location. A car will be with you shortly. Please stay on the line. I do so, keeping as far away from my bedroom door as I can, terrified that at any moment the person with my sister's voice is going to barge through. Eddie, she shouts, making me jump. Eddie, you need to let me in. You need to come with me. I swear that I hear a car drive past outside, and I turn to look through the rain-washed window. And as I do so, my heart nearly stops in my chest. Down there at the side of the road, standing in the rain and looking up into my window, right at me, is my family. My mom, my dad, and Luis, just standing in a line, hands by their sides, staring up at me, staring up into my window. And they are all smiling, all grinning that same, chilling grin, looking up at me, unblinking. The police arrived about 10 minutes after that, and they had a hell of a time calming me down. I never heard my sister leave from behind the doorway, though the officers didn't find anyone, even after a thorough search of the house. My family outside vanished after I briefly turned away. 1 minute they were there, and the next, gone. My mother nearly had a panic attack of her own when she came home to find cop cars parked up outside. Louise had no idea what the hell I was talking about, none of them did, and she insisted she wasn't playing any kind of prank. She can be annoying at times, but still, I really can't see her doing anything like this. I can't see any of them doing something like this. I had to wait to see their mouths move in time to their speech before I could even begin to let my guard down. Also, it's been about a month since this incident. I have a lock on my door now, and I haven't seen or heard anything quite so terrifying since. But I still get angsty at night, and hell, who wouldn't? And I tell you what else, too. When my family are heading out and they ask if I want to go along. These days, I say yes. My crazy friend ended up becoming a murderer. I had this friend who was really into the occult. Unfortunately, I was the one who got him turned on to it. We had a mutual appreciation of the paranormal and all things weird, so I thought the subject would interest him. He started going deep into the subject to the point where he wouldn't talk about anything else. He would actually interrupt a conversation and force the subject back to occult matters. Rude, but sometimes people go through phases where their interest is all they want to talk about. It was a mostly forgivable offense. I think I should mention that this particular friend didn't have a very large friend circle. His depression and introverted nature kept him inside a lot. He didn't have the best luck in relationships with women. His world was kind of small, and I did enjoy hanging out with him, so I did my best to be a good friend. I didn't want to just brush him off because he was acting a little weirder than normal. Things started to go downhill when he started to smoke DMT. Personally, I think psychedelics are amazing tools that can offer insight into your life, but they should be treated with respect. My friend got to the point where he was making it himself and he was smoking it daily, multiple times a day. For those of you who aren't familiar with the substance, when you smoke it, you get transported to a different world, an entirely new plane of existence. Your body and yourself don't exist anymore. You're just exploring this alternate reality dreamscape. My personal experience with it led me to seeing a dragon once in this kaleidoscope of a cornucopia. People see all kinds of different things there. Imagine what that does to a person when they're smoking it 30+ times in a day. He started telling me things like he was the reincarnated Osiris. He said he was seeing Egyptian hieroglyphs all over the place in waking life. Apparently he had hour-long conversations with entities in his bedroom even when he wasn't smoking DMT. Of course, I was very alarmed to hear all of this, and I told him he needed to take a serious break. No drugs at all for a few months so he can find solid footing in reality again. At this point I was still hanging out with him because he obviously needed some help, and like I said before, he didn't have a lot of friends that could give him that. He was also the black sheep of the family, so I knew he wasn't getting any kind of support from them. He was really close to his sister, and I did reach out to her on Facebook to express my concerns. I pushed her to talk him into getting some psychiatric help, because he was slipping past the point of no return. I'm not really sure if she took my messages seriously since we didn't really know each other. Plus, she is at least 6 years younger than us and possibly didn't grasp how serious the situation was becoming. In any case, I'll jump forward now to the part where things start to get really creepy. My boyfriend had made arrangements to hang out with our friend at the park. I didn't really want to go because I felt like I needed a break from him and his nonsensical ranting. I just couldn't deal with it on that particular day. My boyfriend said he wasn't all that bad and we went anyway. We get to the park and he is his usual self, ranting about Egypt and made-up gods that only he knew the truth about, etc. He also had this large hunting knife that he kept fiddling with the whole time we were on a walk. He told us that he had been using it in ceremonial magic, and that it helped to banish negative thoughts. It made me extremely uneasy. He would do this thing where he would take the knife and make stabbing motions near his heart or head, like he was mock stabbing himself, all while holding a conversation with me or my boyfriend. I think we were both really on edge and didn't know what to say or do about it. I tried to distract him from doing it by bringing up other subjects that might interest him, but he kept on with his ritual. Keep in mind we were walking on a trail, so it wasn't like we could just say goodbye then and there. We had to walk back to our car and drop him off at his car. My boyfriend had the bright idea that we should get some lunch after our walk, even though I was doing my best to give him a look that said, "No, you crazy fuck. Why do you think I want to spend any more time with this nut?" But it must not have been very effective, or my boyfriend was ignoring it. Not sure. Either way, we ended up getting in the car to go get lunch. In the car I was driving, my boyfriend was in the passenger seat, and our weirdo friend was in the back. The whole time I kept thinking about that huge ass knife he had in his pocket, and obviously he was completely off his rocker now. I was afraid to say anything or confront him because I didn't know how he was going to react. We get to the restaurant and my boyfriend runs inside to grab food. I'm left alone in the car with our friend and I try to act like I'm browsing on my phone, when really I'm watching and listening as hard as I can. We don't talk. My boyfriend gets back and I complain that I'm tired. It's been a long day, let's drop him off, etc. So I drive us back to our friend's car and he doesn't get out of our vehicle. He just sits there. I have to get a little bit rude and ask him to please get out and go home. He gets out of our car and walks over to his passenger side. I start getting really scared and I suspected the worst. He pulled a gun out of some kind of bag he had on the seat and he just walks over to our car with it. I don't know why the fuck I did this, but I was so pissed I just got out of my car and walked right up to him. I was maybe 3 feet away and could see it was a loaded 9mm. I kept asking him over and over, "What are you doing?" Because apparently that's all my brain could think to do. I told him to get in his car and go home. He never said anything during this whole time, just kind of cried and had this wild look in his eye. For whatever reason he got back into his car and drove off. I told my boyfriend obviously we are never hanging out with him again and that I didn't even want him to talk to him anymore. A few months pass and he occasionally messages me through the PlayStation or texts my phone. He says a lot of random stuff and I just ignore it. It turns out he moved down to Tennessee near Nashville. I don't know why. He had a roommate and I think their girlfriend lived there. I'm not really sure about the situation. I think maybe he's turning his life around and getting a fresh start down there. I think it's best to cut all contact and let him regroup. I'm not interested in any kind of friendship with him and I know he needed help beyond what I could offer. Again, I reached out to his sister and let her know that he had a gun. She managed to get it from him somehow, but it did little good in the end. I get a call around 11 p.m. one night that wakes me up. It's a man claiming he's a detective down in Gallatin, Tennessee, and my heart skips a beat. I start sweating and immediately ask what happened. Apparently my former friend stabbed someone to death on Halloween Day. I don't know all the details, and the articles about it are kind of sparse. The whole thing is really surreal and I'm just left feeling like I'm lucky that I didn't get shot last summer. This whole thing turned out way longer than I meant it to be, but that's the story. I'm still feeling creeped out by the whole ordeal, and I'm kind of feeling sick after writing all of this. Every night, at 4 a.m., I hear a woman crying in my backyard. Every night, without fail, I hear a woman crying in our backyard. The first time it happened, my wife woke me up. "Harry, do you hear that?" she asked, in a terrified whisper. Those are 4 words you don't want to hear in the middle of the night. Images of a home invasion raced through my mind, shots fired, our children and my pregnant wife dead in their beds. But when I strained to listen, all I heard was the sound of someone crying. Man or woman, child or adult, I couldn't be sure. Only one thing I knew, it was coming from right under our window. "Is there someone out there?" Emily called from the bed. "I don't know." Despite the sound, when I squinted into the gray shadows, I couldn't see anyone. "I'm going to check," I said, heading for the door. "No, stay here, we'll call the police. Some people use recordings of babies crying to lure people out." I laughed. "Where'd you hear that?" "Forensic files." I swung the door open. "First of all, it's not a baby. Second of all, I won't actually go outside. I'll just take a look. I can't see Jack from the window." I went downstairs, armed with nothing more than a cell phone. But when I shined the light around through the windows, I didn't find anyone. The crying, however, continued. Now it sounded like it was coming from the forest surrounding our backyard, just past the tree line. And to me, it sounded like a woman's cries, too restrained to be a child's and too soft and high-pitched to be a man's. I pulled open a window, cupped my hands, and called out, "Hey, do you need help?" The crying sound stopped immediately, but she didn't reply. No other sounds came from the forest, save for the wind rustling through the trees. "Hello," I yelled. "Anyone out there?" A beat of silence. Then she started screaming. Blood-curdling shrieks, over and over. No words, no cries for help. Just screaming. That pushed me into action. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. There's a woman screaming in my backyard. I think she's hurt or in danger. She won't respond to me. My address is 20 Petunia Ave. The stairs creaked as my wife rushed down. "Did you call the police?" I nodded. "Oh my God, what the hell is going on out there?" She kept her hand protectively over her belly, as if to shield our unborn child from whatever horrors lay outside. My hand reached for the glass door. What if someone is killing her, right now? Or what if she's being abducted, and they'll both be gone by the time the police are here? Emily yanked me back. "No, you are not going out there." "But," she pulled the door shut and locked it. "You could get killed." Thankfully, the police arrived a minute or two later. As they walked into the backyard, the screaming cut off suddenly. Their flashlights scanned through the trees as they searched, lighting the leaves in white. 20 minutes later, they came back empty-handed. They didn't find so much as a footprint in the wet mud. "Probably what you heard was the foxes," the officer said. "They've got this crazy mating call that sounds just like a woman screaming." "But I heard her crying." "Look it up online," he said, with a smile. "I've been fooled by it too. They sound just like a woman screaming her lungs out. It's insane." By the time we climbed back in bed, the gray light of dawn was spreading over the horizon. When I couldn't sleep, I took the officer's advice and looked up fox sounds. Apparently, they do make a sound that sounds pretty similar to a woman screaming. Convincing myself that's all it was, I fell asleep. But the next night, it happened again. 4 a.m. on the dot. The soft crying coming from the forest. I called the police again, yet again, they found nothing. They also warned me not to call them over the crying again unless things got worse. And so I didn't call them when it happened the next night. And the next. And the next. I chalked it up to the foxes, even though they only made screaming sounds, not crying. I forced myself to fall back asleep every time. We invested in a heavy-duty white noise machine, bought fans, too, for good measure, turned everything up to full blast, and, for about a week, we all slept like babies. Thankfully, the kids' rooms didn't face the backyard, so they never heard a thing. Then the night of August 24th happened. The night started out well. Emily and I got the kids to sleep early, and we cuddled in bed for a long time, longer than we had in weeks. Our little Ellie, I said, skimming my hand across her belly. Despite her being 5 months pregnant, there was barely a bump there. Are you sure you're eating enough? I'm fine, she replied, pulling my hand into hers and giving it a squeeze. I just don't want to gain so much weight like I did the last 2 times. You know I think you're beautiful at any weight, right? I asked. You don't need to do this for me. I'm not. She smiled and closed her eyes. I love you, Harry. I love you, too. We fell asleep in each other's arms, only to be woken a few hours later by the crying. It was louder, much louder, so loud I could hear it over the white noise. As I tossed and turned my way out of a deep sleep and pulled myself out of bed, I realized why. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from our closet. I immediately shut off the white noise and got out of bed. Who's there? I yelled, my hand firmly on my phone, ready to dial 911. No response, just more halting sobs, shuddering breaths, soft sniffles. What's going on? Emily asked, sleepily. There's someone in the closet. I turned my phone's flashlight on. The light twinkled in the darkness, bouncing off the metal doorknob. Emily, call the police, I said, advancing towards the door. I heard the soft sounds of the dial tone behind me, then Emily's hurried voice. We're calling the police, I said. Tell me who you are. More sobbing. I charged up to the door. I grasped the doorknob. With a deep breath, I twisted and pulled. A terrified woman looked up at me. It was Emily. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her face was wet with a never-ending stream of tears. But it was, without a doubt, my wife. She sobbed, over and over, as she stared up at me, as if she weren't quite registering who I was. Then I looked down, and my blood ran cold. Her hands rested on her stomach. Her round, protruding stomach. She was visibly pregnant. Harry, Emily called from the bed. Is everything okay? I looked down at the crying woman. Her sobs were silent. Now, she just stared up at me, silently, tears in her eyes. Harry, Emily said, more insistently this time. I slowly shut the door. My hands were shaking, my legs were weak. When I turned around, Emily was sitting on the edge of the bed, her brown eyes locked intently at me. The closet was empty, I said. I walked back over to the bed, nearly fainting in the process, and sat down next to her. I must have just imagined it. Alwa, Harry, she said, wrapping an arm around me. I flinched at her touch. This whole thing has been stressing you out, huh? I nodded. 3 knocks on the door broke through the quiet. Will you go let them in? I would, but I'm not dressed, she said with a light giggle, hands trailing over her silky chemise. I didn't move from the bed. Harry, no, there was no way I was leaving her alone in the bedroom while I went downstairs. I'd go down, but I don't feel so good, I lied. I think, I just need to lie down. Will you handle it? She paused, staring into my eyes. Then she finally nodded. She got off the bed, pulled on a bathrobe, and headed towards the door. As soon as she disappeared from sight, I ran to the closet. She was still there. The woman who looked just like my wife, sitting on the floor, silently crying. The woman who was my wife. I don't know how I knew she was the right one, I just did. It was something intangible, a gut feeling that I can't put into words. I crouched down and laid my hand on her shoulders. Emily, Emily, can you hear me? Her eyes stared blankly into mine. Tears streamed down her face. What happened to you? She didn't reply. Voices murmured downstairs. Heavy footsteps resonated through the house. We were running out of time. I grabbed her hand. You have to come with me. Now. She slowly, shakily, stood up. I pulled her out of the bedroom, and we softly entered the hall, making our way to our kids' room. Downstairs, the lights were on. Emily was turned away from us, talking to the 2 policemen in dark outfits. We can't let her see us. Silence. Don't make a sound. Don't even. Emily suddenly let go of my hand. She ran. Her footsteps thundered across the hall as she sprinted into our kids' room. Emily, no, I whispered. As I ran after her, I glanced down the staircase. Emily was staring at us. So were the police officers. Their hands were on their guns. That's when I realized that Emily hadn't been calling 911 at all. She'd been calling for backup. I dove into our kids' bedroom. My wife was already crouched over Abby and Mark, sobbing uncontrollably. And for the first time since I found her, she was speaking, muttering the same 3 words over and over. I love you. I helped them out of bed. Abby, Mark, we need to go. Now. They sleepily followed me towards the door, my wife trailing behind them. I opened the door. Emily stood in front of us. The 2 policemen stood behind her, guns raised. Run, I said to Emily. It was a risk. A huge one. They could shoot all of us in an instant. But, for some reason, they didn't. We ran down the stairs, and they chased after us. But no shots were fired. We were alive. As we ran out the door, I grabbed our car keys from the hook. Then we were pulling out of the driveway. The 3 of them stood in the doorway, watching us, guns still raised, yet never pulling the trigger. Abby, Mark, are you okay? I asked as we pulled onto the highway. Daddy, what's happening? Abby asked. Are we in trouble? Mark asked. We're okay now, I said. We reported everything to the police, but by the time they arrived at the house, it was empty. No trace of the woman I'd called my wife for months. No trace of the 2 police officers, either. We quickly sold the house and moved several states away. Emily recovered very slowly, but she didn't seem to sustain any permanent damage. In time, she eventually told me what happened. It was a few months ago, about a month after we got pregnant, she said, her hands shaking as she picked up her cup of tea. I got up to use the bathroom, and I heard someone outside. Someone crying for help. I went to the back door, opened it, and called out to see if they needed help. Then, I don't remember. I'm so sorry, I said, squeezing her hand. I kept waking up in the woods. Every time I did, I tried to make my way back to you. But all I could do was cry and scream. It was like my mind was too foggy to form words. I think I must have been drugged or something. She squeezed my hand back, but all I could think about was you. Getting back to you, and Abby, and Mark. When I found the door unlocked one night, I walked up to our bedroom. And then, I don't remember, but I must have gotten scared, because I found myself in the closet, hiding away from you and that woman's voice. Unable to stop crying. I'm just glad you're back, I said, wrapping her in my arms and holding her tight. Now, it's been almost a year since Emily and I got away. While life has been wonderful, and baby Lee is the sweetest thing, a gnawing fear has settled in my stomach. I've tried to ignore it and pass it off as stress, anxiety, fear, one of those haunting thoughts born out of terror rather than logic. But the more time that passes, the harder it is to ignore. Our 2 other kids, Abby and Mark, they haven't grown an inch since we moved here. My husband keeps asking the same question over and over, and it's driving me up a wall. My husband started telling dad jokes before he was old enough to pour his own juice, so I may have missed a red flag or 2, or 4, but in my defense, this kind of juvenile behavior seemed very on brand at the time. Let me give you some quick context. The entire first year Stephen and I lived together, anytime we exchanged I love yous, he would quickly pinch my cheek and shout, "BZZZT, make your own damn waffles." Neither of us even liked waffles, he just got a kick out of spoiling the moment. And although I'd groan and roll my eyes, his dumb shtick cracked me up. Lord help me, it absolutely cracked me up. So when I shuffled into the kitchen one morning, fresh from sleep, his odd remark barely registered. "Can you see me smile?" I glanced at Stephen from across the center island. "What?" He leaned back and blinked. "What? Thought you said something." He shrugged and shook his head. My imagination then. As I poured a cup of coffee, he said it again. Quieter this time. "Can you see me smile?" Here we go. Stephen's jokes were usually unfunny for that first week or 2, until his relentless commitment tickled my funny bone. "That's nice, honey," I said after a yawn. Then I circled the island and went in for a kiss, but instead noticed a sore beneath his left nostril. Oof, get some cream on that. On my way out of the room, Stephen began ratcheting coughs. Things seemed normal for the next few days. He periodically dropped the smile line mid-conversation and then continued on like normal. Once or twice he even said it over the phone. "Hey hon, I'm at the store. Do or need any? Can you see me smile? Kitchen roll." Stephen picked up some cream for his increasingly gruesome scab, although that didn't seem to help. If anything, it made things worse. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, he slurped up some pasta, stared dead into my eyes, and twisted his mouth in this horrible pumpkin grin. "Can you see me smile?" I set down my fork. "Okay, enough. It's been a week and I'm still not laughing." "What are you talking about?" "That stupid can you see me smile thing." He cocked his head to the side. Don't even start. Just drop it already." The 2 of us went back and forth, him pushing me to explain myself, me growing steadily more agitated. "Can't you just admit this gag didn't land and move on?" "Well, the only gags that do land are ones about airplanes, but I still don't understand what you're talking about." The tension immediately dissolved as I half-groaned, half-chuckled at his zinger. Later, as I soaked in the tube with 2 cucumber slices over my eyes, the door at the far side of the room creaked open. "Stephen," I called. Another creak. "Hello?" I slid up, catching the slices. There was no one else in the steamy room. A draft had most likely blown the door open. I settled back into a comfortable position. Afterward, while toweling myself off, I noticed a smiley face in the fogged-up mirror above the sink, accompanied by the words, "Can you see me smile?" Stephen had already turned in for the night, so my lecture about boundaries got placed on hold until morning. Sometime after midnight, an awful dream about falling into this endless black void startled me awake. For a moment the sensation carried into the real world, no doubt because the mattress had compressed beneath our combined weight. I opened my eyes in an attempt to escape the sensation of that awful dream and saw Stephen, who held himself directly above me, supported by his elbows and knees. His nose was pressed right up against mine. I bit down on a scream. Stephen's sore had spread, now he looked like a toddler after devouring a plate of jam sandwiches. Was he picking at those oozing scabs? "What the fuck?" I shouted. Immediately he rolled onto his half of the bed and faced the wall, pretending to snore. I thumped the back of his skull hard. "You almost gave me a heart attack." He acted all innocent like he'd just woke up, the corners of his mouth twitching as though pulled by invisible strings. "Oh, what was that for?" He propped up against the backboard, one hand rubbing the bump across the back of his head, the other fingering a leaky sore under his chin. Turning away, I said, "This is getting seriously old. You're not funny." He began to protest but then entered a harsh coughing fit. It rose from deep inside his chest as he raced down the hall. "Then go see a dermatologist," I shouted after him. When the alarm screeched, the far side of the bed was still empty. I crossed the upstairs landing and went into the bathroom, where Stephen stood before the sink, eyes fixed on his own reflection. He stretched and twisted his lips, which had gone pale at the corners, using his forefingers. From the doorway, I said, "Look, sorry about last night, but you scared the crap out of me. Can we act like the whole thing never happened?" He pulled the sides of his mouth apart. The gums looked gray and unhealthy. I rolled my eyes. Fine. On my way across the hall, he shouted, "Can you see me smile?" I called my mom from work, who listened to me vent for 20 minutes. He just won't give it a rest with this smiling thing. Be upfront. Explain how much it's bothering you. That sounded reasonable. Stephen liked juvenile jokes, granted, but he wasn't a man-child or anything. Most likely the two of us could get this straightened out and then go for a romantic meal someplace fancy. Back home, Stephen was in the downstairs lounge, furiously scribbling into a notebook. "Can we talk?" I asked. He stayed hunched forward, his attention fixated on his writing. "Sorry if I was a little short-tempered last night. I didn't mean to hit you so hard. But this joke, it really got under my skin. You think we could pretend the whole thing never happened?" No response. "Can you please answer me, or at least acknowledge you're listening?" I moved forward and snatched the notepad away. Stephen stood, suddenly enough to startle me, and grabbed it back. For a split second, I glimpsed the words, "Can you see me smile?" written over and over again. He grinned, exposing teeth of startling whiteness. Had he bleached them? This wasn't a joke anymore. It was full-blown mental illness. "Stephen, talk to me. What's wrong?" He cleared his watery throat. "Can you see me smile?" He tossed the notebook aside and took a single step forward, arms outstretched. Thin trickles of blood ran along his chin from where he'd compulsively nibbled his bottom lip. "Can you see me smile?" I retreated into the hall. "Stephen, can you see me smile?" He coughed harshly before saying it again in a kind of hoarse growl. Thick wads of saliva flew from those pale lips. I spun on my heels and made for the door, Stephen walking after me. "Can you see me smile?" He followed me out of the house and across the front walkway. The second I pulled the door of my Ford Escort shut, he drum-rolled the window. "Can you see me smile? Can you see me smile?" As I slipped the vehicle into gear, he breathed over the glass to fog it up and wrote a backward CAN. It's a miracle I didn't plow over him barreling out of that driveway in reverse. My eyes had gone all red and puffy by the time I reached Mom's place. The police showed zero interest in Stephen's condition. "Yeah, sure, your husband keeps telling you to smile. We'll get right on that." Neither did the paramedics. "You want us to send an ambulance over a nasty rash." Stephen didn't respond to any of my messages, nor answer my calls. That night, I lay awake praying he was okay, that he'd made use of the mental health resources I'd sent over. Mom told me to steer clear until we could arrange for somebody to accompany me home. But laying in that cold, empty bed, I had terrible nightmares about Stephen hurting himself. He needed help, and it couldn't wait. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was entirely dark. A nasty aroma hit me the second I pushed open the front door, a strangely familiar, coppery scent. There were dull thuds from somewhere upstairs. I slowly climbed the steps. In the landing, I flicked on the light and stifled a yelp. Scribbled up and down the walls were the words, "Can you see me smile?" Stephen had covered every inch of space from floor to ceiling. My heart kicked into a higher gear. The door to the bathroom sat slightly ajar. I tiptoed forward, the color of the writing switching from black to red in what I assumed was lipstick or paint. Gently I rapped the door. "Stephen," I called, so low I almost couldn't hear myself. Then, after a little while, I went in. My husband was crouched in the corner naked, his back to me. He dragged a lobster red hand up and down the wall, smearing the word SE over the cream-colored tiles, stopping only to replenish the ink by vomiting thick red phlegm onto his fingers. Oh fuck, it was blood. He'd written those words with his own blood. "Can you see me smile?" he snarled, along with a full-body spasm. There was something wrong with his voice. He sounded like a patient in a dentist's chair with a prop in their mouth. The door made a creak sound as I flinched back without meaning to. Stephen's head perked up. I spun into the hall and raced toward the stairs. Halfway there, Stephen threw himself hard against the back of my legs, sending us both careening down the steps. I landed flat on my back. Directly above my head, two blurry light bulbs circled one another. I watched them go round and round until two Stephens, their mouths caked with dry, crusty blood, leaned into my window of vision. He pinned me down. In between gruesome wheezes that slid up from his throat, he repeated those 5 words again and again. As my vision stabilized, I realized it wasn't just blood on his face. Tendons and jaw muscles were exposed, pulling and vibrating like overtuned guitar strings. Fragments of bone even shined through in places. The lips in the surrounding area had been chewed or cut or scratched away. His cheeks hung loose in torn flaps. He brought us nose to nose, his exposed jaw inches from my mouth. "Can you see me smile?" That raw sewage breath absolutely reeked. A big purple tongue slid out of his mouth, finding its way inside my right nostril. As I lashed out against him, raw meat peeled away beneath my fingernails. He eventually made a sound like a cat hacking up a fur ball, exposed teeth chattering and closing and crunching. I seized the opportunity by worming my way out from under him and made a break for the kitchen, where I armed myself with a steak knife. He followed me into the room, canines bared. "I'm fucking warning you," I screamed. He grinned, although I could tell only by the eyes, those mad eyes that almost seemed to laugh. As he shuffled forward, his pincer jaw clamped shut again and again. Finally, he lunged, and I rammed that knife straight into his throat. Stephen's body went completely limp before slumping onto the floor. The paramedics actually wretched when they arrived. "Craziest fucking thing I ever saw," said the taller of the pair. A police officer couldn't believe the story. Still a stammering mess, I recounted how Stephen had mutilated himself before attacking me over and over. He took me to the station for an official statement, after which Mom took me to her place, where, for some odd reason, my mouth wouldn't stay closed. I sobbed into her shoulder, licking my lips again and again. My tongue had the texture of a carpet, plus something kept turning over in my gut. Acid reflux maybe. Eventually, an urge to open my mouth and let out a giant, irresistible yawn overpowered me. Then Mom reeled away, her face laced with concern. What do you mean, honey? I threw her a confused look and scratched my itchy mouth. What do you mean, what do I mean? She reached over and wiped the tear off my cheek. Why wouldn't I be able to see you smile? I'm a deep-sea diver. In case you missed it, scientists recently released audio footage of a cavern collapse along the ocean floor. They're lying. All names have been changed to keep me out of hot water, legally speaking. For 6 days, I shared a cramped metal pod with 3 other divers, 594 feet below sea level. At that depth, there was a constant risk of explosive decompression, which would have resulted in the cholesterol from our veins being about the only thing left to bury. On the 6th day, a grainy voice spoke over the comms link and gave us the green light, then boss told us to strap on our suits. These came equipped with circulating hot water systems to prevent hypothermia. Typically, 4-man teams split into groups of 2, alternating shifts. Not us. Boss was 42 years old and a good family man. I remember how choked up his voice got speaking with his daughter before submersion. When he found out my wife was pregnant, he gave me some great advice. Advice like, build a nest egg and then get the hell out of the diving game ASAP. Soldier and Gamble, I didn't know quite so well. Soldier mostly read in his bunk and trained, whereas Gamble just complained about how none of us played cards. He said the minute the cash got wired into his account, he was booking a suite at the Bellagio. Considering the money we were making, I doubted even he could blow through the earnings at a blackjack table. You ever been on a job that pays this good for a single day's work? Gamble asked me one afternoon as we sat in the main chamber, an egg-shaped compartment 20 feet long by 16 in diameter. I shook my head. How about you, soldier? Nope, he answered, while doing clapping push-ups in the space between our bunks. It's just weird, you know, all that talk of planting charges and local biodiversity. It sure doesn't sound like we're blowing up a cavern. Boss sat up in bed and made a cut-it-out gesture, his eyes flicking toward this little black cube in the ceiling. A camera. My hand literally cramped up from the mountain of NDAS our employers made us sign, which is another way to say the suits took discretion very, very seriously. Once the command came in, we each used the bathroom, and then piled into the diving bell through a hatch in the ceiling. Like always, I concentrated on my mental exercises. Breathe in, breathe out. They were about the only thing that kept me from obsessing over how, if anything went wrong with the detachments, the chamber would crumble like a tin can. Gauges, switches, and monitors lined the curved walls of the bell. They lit up as we slowly rotated into position and then flushed outside, into the cold water. Boss's voice came over the radio in my face mask. Take it nice and slow. I know we're all itching to get home, but don't be complacent. Let's do this once and do it right. Space out the charges, double check everything's armed. If anything goes wrong, listen to my instructions. You can't imagine what it's like down there, in the bowels of the planet. You're free falling into an open void while Lord knows what swims around you. Every so often you'll feel a ripple and know some strange, alien life form just passed by, inches from your face. Guided only by our headlamps, we plunged until a bumpy and uneven surface rose to meet our boots. Then, we hop-walked around like astronauts. The floor sucked at my ankles, a greedy hidden mouth. It felt like standing on a shag carpet that shivered and flexed every once in a while. Not like any cavern I'd seen. So far as I could tell, we'd landed on some sort of formation with stadium-sized holes threaded throughout. Steep, sudden drop-offs my lamp couldn't touch the bottom of. I'd never seen anything like it. Why had they sent us here, of all places? In near zero visibility, the 4 of us spread out and planted our charges. As the distance between me and my teammates grew, the radio feed broke apart, and an intense panic washed over me. Breathe in, breathe out. Stay calm. We trained for this. A dive coordinator once told me if you can't roll with mishaps, you need to get the fuck out of the ocean. He was right, too. Once, my suit's umbilicals got tangled in a boat's tool rack, and the jerky movements from the crashing waves overhead almost separated me from my gas supply. For a moment I squeezed my eyes shut and prepared to meet my maker. Nobody else is gonna save you. Through a combination of discipline, training, and sheer dumb luck, I somehow cheated death that day. After 2 hours laying charges, rounding several chasms along the way, I closed in on our starting position. Boss's voice crackled through my face mask. How we looking? Only 1 more to go, I answered, relieved. Same here, said Gamble. 15 minutes later, our 3 headlamps converged at the meeting point. Soldier, as usual, kept his responses short and sweet. ETA 10 minutes. Most likely he picked up that sharp, methodical communication style in the military. Not much longer. Breathe in, breathe out. Soon we'd return to the cabin, spend 5 days depressurizing. Then I'd get home in time for my son's birth. Every once in a while, water rushed by and whirled around us as something big swam past. Something none of us could see. Maybe it kept out of our lights deliberately. Maybe it wanted to stay hidden. Boss, who could monitor all of our vital signs through a little monitor attached to his wrist, pointed his light at me and said, "We're almost done. Nice and easy. Breathe in, breathe out." Another ripple. What creatures lived at depths of 600 plus FT? Pelican eels, hatchetfish, octopus, but none of those stirred the water quite like that. Nearly there, Boss said, after another quick glance at my vitals. A yellow blob bobbed toward us as Soldier rounded a pit, laying one final charge along the way. While he drifted closer and closer, Boss performed a few last-minute checks, but before he could give the all-clear, the ground flexed, and water particles stirred in front of my helmet. A powerful suction reeled us all downward, like hungry quicksand. As my thoughts circled back to my pregnant wife, I hoped she'd be well compensated for her husband's death. As the intensity of those ripples swelled, each of us careened off in different directions. Someone shouted, "What the fuck is happening?" Over the comms, "It might have been me." "Everybody stay calm," boss said, as calmly as he could manage. "Breathe in, breathe out. Lose your sense of direction at that depth, and reorienting is a real bitch." Unsure what way was up, and still clueless as to what actually knocked us off course, I kicked in the direction of the nearest light. Our torches drifted closer and closer, still spread out across an area the size of a football field. For a few glorious seconds, I thought everybody might make it out alive. But then, as more shock waves pulsed out, I got this sense of a giant organism, Leviathan-esque in size and somehow denser than the surrounding blackness, snaking its way out of the pit. One of the lights vanished. In an instant somebody was gone. Swallowed. Taken. My chest went into furious convulsions as I floated helplessly, frozen in place, until part of me became vaguely aware of boss's voice screaming, "We have to go," through the headset. Breathe in, breathe out. I swam up in the direction of the pod, chasing the 2 remaining beacons. Breathe in, breathe out. Don't think about what happened. Hell, you didn't even see what happened. At this depth, your mind play tricks. My brain was so fogged out I don't remember climbing back inside the bell, or worrying about the mechanism sealing properly. The hatch closed with a hiss of air, followed by metal divots sliding into place. Once the water drained, boss got on the comms and brought up soldiers' telemetrics in the hope we could save him. Surely there hadn't actually been some kind of giant life form out there. Surely I'd only imagined that part. The data recorded by Soldier's suit, before it went offline, indicated the poor bastard plunged 203 feet in 30 seconds. His internal temperature spiking thirditic. My hands would not stop trembling. Not just my imagination then. Breathe in, breathe out. There'd be no rescue mission, nobody even suggested the idea. And from the expression on boss's face, I didn't think any of us would ever breathe a word about this. No wonder the suits running the operation took discretion so seriously. After boss punched in a few more keys, a countdown began. Breathe in, breathe out. The concussive force of a powerful blast made us rattle in our seats. Metal groaned all around me, and for a second the bell went dark. I waited for the smooth walls to compact into a sphere no larger than a marble. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in. Lights blinked back on, one at a time. A collective sigh of relief went out, then boss pushed the comms link and announced we were ready for DSAT. DSAT stresses your body. For 5 days, we endured joint pain, headaches, and shortness of breath, speaking only when absolutely necessary, unsure whether whatever took Soldier might come back for us. What even was it? Had the charges been meant to kill it? Did it live within the chasm, or had we actually been walking around on some nightmarish creature's back? We emerged pale, disoriented, and drained, like prisoners released from solitary. After so long under artificial light, the sun burned my retinas. Up on the ship, they let us take showers, had the chef whip up meals of our choosing, and then let us call our families only after reminding us about the NDAS. The ship docked off the southern coast of Greenland, where a taxi transported us to a private airstrip. Boss, Gamble, and I didn't hug, shake hands, or even say goodbye. We simply nodded at one another. I'm too much of a coward to tell Soldier's family what happened, so I'm sharing it with all of you instead. I haven't dived since that day, partly because of the guilt, partly because a giant lump forms in my throat at the mere thought of getting back in the ocean. And whenever that happens, I force myself out of that waking nightmare by focusing on the exercises. Breathe in, breathe out.